They told everyone I was the good child, the one who always helped, never complained, always sent money. Every Friday, like clockwork, I transferred $850 to my parents so they could keep their dream house. I thought it meant I was part of the family. Then, Thanksgiving came. I texted Mum asking what time to come by. Her reply hit harder than any betrayal I've ever known. We already had it. You can come later for a photo. No invitation, no seat at the table, just an afterthought. I smiled, typed, "It's okay," and put down my phone. But inside, something in me broke, and something else woke up. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank, and with one quiet click, ended their $100,000 mortgage support. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up like fireworks, 47 missed calls. That was the night everything changed. You think this is just about money? No. This is about respect, and what happens when the person you underestimated the most finally stops paying for your comfort. Keep watching, because by the time they realised what I really took from them, Thanksgiving wasn't their only loss. My name is April Martinez. I'm 33 years old, a chief financial officer at a logistics firm in Denver. Numbers have always made sense to me, people, not so much. I learned early that stability wasn't guaranteed, so I built it myself. Every Friday morning before the city wakes, I make the same transfer I've made for the past 5 years, $850 to my parents in Texas. The memo line never changes. Love you. It's my way of staying connected, of showing gratitude for parents who raised me on next to nothing. But lately, I've started to wonder if it's gratitude or guilt. My brother Danny never sends them a cent. He lives 30 miles from their house, has a new truck, and calls once a month if that. Yet somehow he's still the favourite. He always has been. When we were kids, I scrubbed dishes and mowed the lawn while he watched TV. If I asked for help, Mum would say, "Let your brother rest, April. He's younger." That phrase became the anthem of my childhood. Even now I can still hear it whenever I pick up the phone to call home. Last Friday, I sent the transfer as usual. Then I called like I always do. It rang 3 times before Mum answered, her voice distracted. "Oh, April, honey. I can't talk long, I'm in the middle of something." I smiled into the receiver out of habit. "That's fine, Mum. Just wanted to check in." "You're sweet," she said quickly. "I'll call you later, okay?" She didn't. She never does. I stayed on the line a few seconds longer, listening to the background noise. Then I heard her laugh. Not the tired, polite laugh she used with me, but the kind that comes from the stomach unguarded and real. "Danny," she called, her voice warm, "your favourite dish is ready." I froze. My chest tightened, but I didn't say a word. I hung up, placed the phone face down on the table, and stared at the transfer confirmation still glowing on my laptop screen. $850. Love you. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it didn't mean anything. But as I sat there in the silence of my Denver apartment, the thought that had lived in the back of my mind for years finally took shape. I wasn't the daughter they just needed my help. I made myself busy, as I always did when I didn't want to feel something. I cleaned, I answered work emails, I prepped reports for Monday's board meeting. But no amount of spreadsheets could balance that equation. By Tuesday, I still hadn't heard from Mum. Not a text, not a call. I told myself she was busy, that maybe something came up. But the word busy started to sound different now. Heavy, hollow. That night, while brushing my teeth, I caught my reflection and almost laughed. There I was, responsible, reliable April. The one who paid the bills, solved the problems, and kept the family running from 3 states away. The one who was always told, "You're such a blessing." The one they forgot to invite when blessings turned into dinners. I crawled into bed that night trying to shake it off, but the silence in my phone felt louder than any alarm. I thought of the way Mum said something came up. I thought of Danny's laugh echoing in the background. I thought of that one word, busy, and how it had followed me all my life like a shadow I could never step out of. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, I'd learned what busy really meant. Thursday morning began like any other workday. My phone alarm buzzed at 6, and I lay in bed for a moment listening to the hum of the heater before dragging myself up. Denver had that early winter chill, the kind that seeps through the windows no matter how tightly you shut them. I wrapped my robe around me, poured coffee, and scrolled through emails that didn't matter. I told myself I was too busy to think about Thanksgiving. Too busy to notice that no one from home had called to ask if I was coming. But the truth was, I was waiting. Around noon, I gave in and texted Mum. What time should I come tomorrow? It was short, polite, familiar. The kind of message you send when you assume love still works like it used to. I set the phone down beside my laptop, telling myself she'd reply any minute. 4 hours later, she did. Oh, honey, we already had it today. Danny had work Friday. You can stop by for photos if you want. For a second, I didn't understand what I was reading. I blinked, reread it twice, and felt something in my chest go very still. Already had it today. I checked the date on my screen Thursday. Not Friday. Thanksgiving Eve. I opened my browser, heart pounding, and typed her name into Facebook. Her profile loaded with cheerful photos, a long dining table covered in food, golden turkey, at the centre glasses of wine raised mid-toast. Dad, Danny, his wife, their kids all smiling. Mum was tagged in every photo. There was laughter frozen in the frame, warmth radiating from every corner of that room. And then I saw it. My seat. The chair I'd sat in every Thanksgiving since I was old enough to reach the table. Only it wasn't empty. It held a pile of coats and someone's purse, as if the space I used to fill had never mattered. I felt my throat tighten, my pulse loud in my ears. I scrolled through more pictures, hoping for some clue, some small mistake that proved that this wasn't what it looked like. But it was. I hadn't been forgotten, they had moved on without me. My phone buzzed again. A heart reaction from Mum under one of the comments that said, "Beautiful family." I set the phone down on the counter and stared at it, trying to breathe. My first instinct was to call her to ask why. But what would she say? It was easier this way. You live so far, you wouldn't have made it on time. I could already hear the excuses, the cheerful deflections that would turn my hurt into guilt. So instead, I opened our text thread. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed, deleted, retyped. Every version of "why didn't you tell me" looked too desperate. Every "I wish I'd been there" felt too small for what they had done. Finally, I wrote the only thing that wouldn't make me cry when I read it back. "It's okay, Mum. Have fun." I added a small red heart at the end, automatic like muscle memory. Then I stared at it. It looked harmless, but it wasn't. It was everything I'd always done, covering disappointment with kindness, turning rejection into understanding. My hand shook as I reread the message. I imagined her seeing it, showing Dad saying, "See, she understands." They'd smile, believing I was fine, believing they could keep taking without ever looking at what it cost. My reflection caught in the dark glass of the window. I looked calm, composed, the good daughter even now. But inside, a slow burn was spreading through me. I wasn't angry, not yet. It was something quieter, sharper. A realization that love shouldn't feel like begging to be seen. I thought of all those Fridays when I wired $850 to their account thinking it meant something, thinking it was connection. Maybe it was just convenience. My eyes went back to the heart at the end of my text. I thought of how many times I'd used that same symbol over the years to smooth over hurt feelings, to prove I was the forgiving one. But tonight, it looked like a bruise. I hovered over the send button, waiting for the familiar wave of guilt to wash in the part of me that always tried to make excuses for them. It didn't come. I felt only stillness, the kind that happens before a decision changes everything. I hit send. The phone screen glowed for a moment, the message sliding into the thread like a quiet ending. I watched the small red heart fade as the screen dimmed. My hands were trembling, but my breathing had steadied. I stared at that heart emoji for 5 minutes before pressing send. It was the last heart I'd give them for a very long time. After I hit send, I sat there for a long while staring at the faint reflection of my face on the dark phone screen. The room was quiet, except for the sound of my own breathing. There was no explosion, no confrontation, just silence. The kind of silence that comes when you finally realize you've been living inside someone else's illusion. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dining table from the photos. Mum smiling, Dad carving the turkey, Danny at the centre laughing his arm around his girlfriend, and me missing as if I never existed. By morning, the ache had hardened into something else. Not rage, not grief, just a need to understand how it got this far. So, I started to look back. Danny is 28. He hasn't worked in 3 years. Lives with mum and dad rent-free in the same room he's had since high school. They call him our miracle. He was born after 2 miscarriages, and ever since the world has bent around him to make sure he never breaks. When we were little, it was small things. He didn't have to clean his plate. He didn't have to share. Mum said, he's been through enough, April. Let him be. I learned early that love was rationed, and my share came after his. At 16, I spent 2 summers working at a diner to save up for a laptop. When I finally bought it, Danny asked to borrow it for just one night. He broke the screen within a week. Mum told me, don't make a fuss, sweetie. You're the responsible one. He didn't mean it. So when I started college, I used my scholarship refund to buy another one. I didn't tell her. I just learned to stop expecting fairness. Years later, when I got my first real job, I sent money home regularly. Danny still hadn't finished community college. He was figuring things out. I paid for groceries, repairs, even Dad's surgery when I was 22. It was $8,000, half my savings. When I called to tell Mum the payment went through, she said, "We're proud of you, honey. But don't forget, Danny sacrifices a lot too, staying home to help us." I remember staring at the phone, trying to find the logic in that sentence. Danny was playing video games in the background. I could hear him laughing. The following year, when I visited for Christmas, Mum had a photo wall, every family moment displayed in careful frames. There were dozens of pictures of Danny, his first car, his fishing trips, his birthdays. My photos were there too, but smaller, half hidden behind a lamp or wedged into the corner of a collage. It was like she wanted to remember me, but not too much. I didn't say anything. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. Every little moment piled up year after year until the weight of them became invisible but constant. Last year, I bought Mum a new Camry after her old car broke down. She cried on the phone, told me I was her angel. 2 months later, Danny borrowed it and crashed it into a mailbox. The front bumper was gone, the headlight shattered. Mum's first words weren't, "Is he okay?" They were, "Please don't be mad at your brother. He feels terrible." I offered to cover the repairs and she let me. I told myself I did it because I could afford to, but deep down I think I did it because I didn't know any other way to be loved by them. After Thanksgiving, I couldn't stop replaying those moments. I scrolled through 15 years of old photos saved on my laptop, every Thanksgiving, every holiday, every visit. I wanted to see if I was imagining it, but I wasn't. In almost every picture, Danny is at the centre of the frame. Mum's hand rests on his shoulder, her smile warm and full. Dad leans toward him. And me, I'm always at the edge, half cut off, blurry. Sometimes I'm in the background clearing dishes or setting food down while everyone else poses. The few times I'm actually seated, I'm looking away from the camera mid-laugh or half-turned as if I don't belong in the story being captured. I zoomed in on one from when I was 25, the year I'd paid off their mortgage for the first time. The whole family was around the table, and I was standing behind Mum holding a wine glass. My face was slightly out of focus. Mum had posted it with the caption, "Family means everything." The irony made my stomach twist. I wondered how many times I'd mistaken duty for love, How many times I told myself that doing more would eventually earn me a place at that table. It never did. Danny's face was in every frame, every celebration, every memory that mattered to them. Even the photos where he wasn't physically there, somehow his presence filled the room. Our miracle, Mum always said, and maybe he was. But what does that make me? The aftermath of a miracle. The extra chapter no one rereads. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. The apartment felt colder than usual. I tried to tell myself that this was just family, that every family had a golden child. But the truth was harder. It wasn't just favoritism, it was erasure. A slow rewriting of history where I existed only as a helper, a provider, a background character in someone else's spotlight. The photos proved it more than words ever could. I thought about that Thanksgiving post again, the coats piled on my chair, the empty space that should have been mine. It wasn't an accident. It was a perfect metaphor for my life. I wasn't just forgotten that Thursday. I'd been erased for years, one family photo at a time. Thanksgiving. Giving morning came grey and cold, the kind of stillness that makes even the walls seem tired. I woke up before sunrise, though there was no reason to. My apartment felt hollow. Every sound amplified the hum of the fridge, the click of the heater. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through my phone. Every post was a celebration. Co-workers smiling beside their children's tables, overflowing with food, golden turkeys and captions about gratitude. One colleague had written, "Family is everything." Another posted a photo with her parents both wearing matching sweaters, the kind of cozy, uncomplicated love that once looked ordinary to me. I set my phone down and stared at the pumpkin pie sitting on the counter. I'd bought it 2 days ago, planning to bring it to Mum's house. It was store-bought, but I had added a little whipped cream and a note that said for dessert. I remember thinking how proud she'd be that I still kept traditions even from miles away. Now it just looked ridiculous sitting there perfectly untouched. Around noon, I turned on the TV for background noise. A rerun of a Thanksgiving parade played bright floats, marching bands, the cheers of a crowd somewhere far away. I heated a frozen turkey dinner in the microwave. The plastic film puffed up as it cooked the gravy, bubbling like it was pretending to be real food. I carried the tray to the coffee table and ate in silence. It didn't taste like anything. Between bites, I kept glancing at the pie still on the counter, as if it were watching me back. I thought about calling them, about saying something, anything, to make the silence less sharp. But I knew how it would go. Mum would answer cheerfully, pretend nothing was wrong. Dad would make a joke. Danny would be in the background laughing, taking up all the air in the room. I'd smile, say I was fine, and hang up feeling smaller than before. So instead, I poured myself a glass of cheap wine and opened my laptop. The blue light lit the room in a lonely glow. Work emails, sale ads, holiday greetings, all the noise of other people's lives. I tried to distract myself with number spreadsheets, anything to keep from feeling. But there's a kind of quiet that even work can't drown out. My eyes drifted to the clock. 3 p.m. Around this time, every year, Mum would be bringing out the mashed potatoes. Danny would be carving the turkey, or at least pretending to while Dad took photos. I'd usually be there setting the table, adjusting the candles, waiting for someone to notice that I'd made the trip home early. They never did. I stood up and walked to the counter, pulling the pumpkin pie closer. Its crust had darkened slightly from the cold air. I took out a single birthday candle from the drawer, a leftover from last year's cake at the office, and pressed it into the pie. Then I lit it. The tiny flame flickered in the dim light, soft and unsteady. I sat down and stared at it for a long time. Then quietly I whispered, "Happy Thanksgiving" to me. The sound of my voice felt foreign in the stillness. I sang the words softly, almost like a joke, but halfway through my throat tightened. The candlelight blurred through my tears. When the flame finally went out, a thin trail of smoke curled upward, disappearing into the ceiling. I wiped my eyes, annoyed at myself for crying. I was too old to still expect anything different from them. And yet, a part of me, the part that had kept hoping all these years, finally went quiet. The knock of my phone startled me. A video call from Danny. For a second, I almost ignored it. But curiosity won. I answered. His face filled the screen, bright and man smug. Hey, April Mum, asked if you're coming by. We've got leftovers. Behind him, I could see the dining table, the same one from the Facebook photos. Mum waved from the background holding a plate. Hi, sweetie. You should stop in. We made too much. The room behind them was full of laughter, clinking glasses, warmth. Danny turned the camera around to show the spread. Look, I said all this food. You missed out. Someone shouted a joke and the whole room erupted in laughter. My brother grinned at me, not noticing how quiet I'd become. Anyway, he said if you leave now, you could be here before dessert. I looked at the screen, the familiar walls, the family that didn't feel like mine anymore. For a heartbeat, I wanted to say yes. To drive through the night, show up at their door, pretend this was all just a misunderstanding. But something in me stopped. A clarity I'd never felt before. I realised I wasn't just outside their celebration. I'd been outside their hearts for years. I didn't owe them my presence any more than they owed me a seat at that table. I'm busy, I said quietly. Tell Mum, Happy Thanksgiving. Before he could answer, I hung up. The silence that followed was absolute. I stared at the reflection of my face on the black screen, faint and hollow. Then I turned off my phone, set it face down and leaned back into the couch. The TV parade had ended. Only static filled the room. I let it play. Outside, the wind picked up rattling the windows. I reached for the empty pie tin and set it aside. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted, not broken, not shattered, but solidifying, like a bone that heals the wrong way, stronger in the fracture. That night, something inside me didn't break. It calcified, like a bone that heals wrong stronger, but never the same. Sleep never came that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the hum of the heater filling the silence. Every thought circled back to the same truth I'd been holding that family together with my money and my silence, and for what? So they could forget me over a turkey dinner. Around 3 a.m, I gave up trying to rest and got out of bed. The city outside was dark, only a few windows lit in the buildings across the street. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the blank screen. Then I opened Excel. The spreadsheet started as a distraction, something logical to contain the chaos inside me. I typed the title at the top in bold letters. Family Investment 2022-2024. Under it, I made columns for dates, amounts, reasons, and recipients. I began filling it in from memory. Weekly mortgage support, $850 every Friday for the past 2 years. That alone was $88,400. Dad's medical surgery, $8,000. Mum's car, the Camry I'd bought last year, $28,000. Danny's emergencies, the laptop he broke, the rent I covered when he got evicted. The business idea that never existed, another $12,000. The total stared back at me from the corner of the screen, $136,400. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. I had always justified it as helping family, but looking at those numbers, it didn't look like help anymore. It looked like control, only I wasn't the one holding it. They were. I clicked save and sat there, hands trembling slightly. I tried to tell myself that it wasn't about the money, it was about trust. But that's the thing about trust, it's easy to give when you never expect to need it back. A thought hit me then, sudden and sharp. The mortgage. I hadn't checked it in months. Technically, I was a co-signer 60%. I'd been making payments directly into the account to keep them afloat. The house wasn't just theirs, it was partly mine. Or, at least, it was supposed to be. I logged into the lender's website, my fingers hesitating over the keyboard. When the page loaded, my chest tightened. The balance looked fine, payments up to date, interest steady, But something caught my eye in the document tab, a file marked Title Transfer Request. The date on it was from 3 months ago. I clicked. The document opened slowly, like the world taking its time before delivering a blow. It was a formal application filed by my parents. The request transfer 100% ownership of the property to my brother Daniel Martinez. I scrolled further down. There was a line for reason for transfer. The typed response read, "Son will inherit and care for us in old age." My vision blurred for a second, and I had to blink to steady myself. They hadn't just left me out of Thanksgiving, they were planning to erase me from the very home I'd been paying for. I kept reading. Their signatures were at the bottom, dated and notarized. Then I saw the note in red from the mortgage company application rejected. Missing cosigner consent. My name was listed beside it, blank space, where my signature should have been. I stared at it, heart pounding. They had tried to move the house entirely into Danny's name without telling me. And they would have succeeded if not for one small technicality. They needed my approval. I sat there, my hand over my mouth, reading the words again and again. I remembered the day 3 months ago when Mum said she was too busy to talk, that she had paperwork to finish. I thought it was about taxes. It wasn't. It was about removing me. The betrayal settled into me like cold air, spreading slowly but completely. For years, I'd been the safety net, the invisible support beam, keeping everything upright. And when they thought they no longer needed me, they tried to saw me out of the foundation. I wondered what they told themselves as they filled out those forms. Maybe they convinced themselves it was practical. Maybe they said Danny would take care of them, that I didn't need the house because I had my own life. Maybe they thought I'd never find out. But they underestimated me. In one way, they thought silence meant ignorance. It didn't. It meant calculation. I opened the spreadsheet again and added one more line at the bottom. Attempted property transfer, August 12, 2024. Under notes, I typed, "No consent requested or granted." I stared at it for a long time. The clean rows, the tidy totals, it looked almost professional. But what it really was evidence. Every penny, every lie, every time I'd been told to be patient or understanding, it was all there in black and white. The sum wasn't just financial, it was emotional. It was the price of being the daughter they took for granted. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time I'd felt proud to be part of that family. Maybe it was never pride. Maybe it was habit. The belief that loyalty was the same thing as love. I looked back at the screen and imagined them sitting at that table eating leftovers, laughing. Maybe Mum was already planning to bring up the house again, asking Danny to handle the paperwork. Maybe Dad had already promised him, "Don't worry, it's all yours someday." Someday had almost come. I clicked out of the document, my hand steady now. The anger had cooled into clarity. I wasn't crying and I wasn't shaking anymore. I just felt still, calm, like a puzzle had finally snapped into place. I saved the spreadsheet, backed it up twice, and closed the file. The numbers were the truth. And truth, once written down, doesn't disappear. I closed the laptop, not because I was done, but because I finally knew exactly what I needed to do. I didn't call them that weekend. For the first time in years, I didn't send the Friday transfer. No text saying, "Love you," no cheerful emoji pretending everything was fine. I just let the silence stretch. It felt strange at first, unnatural, almost cruel. But after everything I discovered, I realized silence wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. I spent that weekend cleaning the apartment, sorting through files, shredding old papers that no longer mattered. My mind was sharp, methodical. The spreadsheet had changed something in me. Once I saw the truth laid out in numbers, I couldn't unsee it. Each dollar had been a piece of myself I'd handed over, and I was done giving pieces away. The next Monday, I started researching. I didn't know much about property law, but I knew enough to be dangerous with a search bar. I read everything: mortgage agreements, cosigner rights, foreclosure processes. Most of it made my stomach twist. Technically, I was still responsible for the payments. Morally, though, I was finished. On the second night, I called a law office downtown. The receptionist's voice was calm, professional. "Do you have an existing case?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I think I'm about to." They scheduled me for a consultation that Friday. I arrived early wearing the same grey blazer I used for board meetings. It felt like armour. The lawyer was a woman in her 40s named Clara Reyes. Sharp eyes, steady tone, the kind of person who spoke in facts, not sympathy. After I explained everything, the weekly transfers, the co-signed mortgage, the attempted title transfer, she sat back and folded her hands. First she said, "You've done more than most people would. But yes, you're still on the hook legally. You can't remove yourself from the loan without refinancing or selling the property." "What if I just stop paying?" I asked. She didn't blink. "Then, the house goes into foreclosure within 90 days, unless they make up the difference." I nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. "So, if they want to keep it, they'll have to start paying for it themselves." "Exactly," she said. "And since you're listed as co-signer, you'll be notified every step of the way. Nothing can happen without your awareness." I thought about that for a long moment. "Can they reapply for ownership transfer?" "Not without your signature," she said. "And I assume you won't be giving that." "No," I said quietly. "Not anymore." She smiled slightly, not with pity, but respect. "You're within your rights to stop voluntary payments. You've carried them long enough. Just be prepared they'll notice." I laughed under my breath. "Oh, they'll notice." When I left her office, the cold December air hit my face like a reset button. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute, watching cars pass people rushing with shopping bags, the city wrapped in holiday lights. Everyone looked so certain of where they were going. I didn't feel certain. But for the first time, I felt in control. The following days blurred together. Work kept me busy, but at night I couldn't stop running scenarios through my mind. I imagined Mum's confusion when the payments stopped Dad's frustration, Danny's shrug. They'd call, of course. They'd demand explanations. But what could they say? That I owed them? That my purpose was to keep their lives comfortable while they planned to erase mine? Each time I pictured it, I felt less guilt and more resolve. Around December 8th, I sat by the window after work, watching the snow start to fall. The city glowed soft and white under the streetlights. My reflection looked different, calmer, older, maybe even stronger. I realised something then. I didn't want revenge. Not really. Revenge would make me just like them, petty, performative, obsessed with control. What I wanted was acknowledgement. To be seen, finally, for who I was and what I'd done. I wanted them to face the truth I'd been living with for years, that their comfort came from my sacrifice. I took out a notebook and began to write a plan, not out of anger, but intention. Step 1, stop the transfers. Step 2, monitor mortgage activity weekly. Step 3, wait for contact. Step 4, respond only when ready. It wasn't a dramatic plan. It was measured, quiet, deliberate, just like me. That weekend, I made a list of all the things I'd put on hold because of them. Vacations I hadn't taken, hobbies. I'd abandoned relationships I'd let fade. I started reclaiming small pieces of myself. I booked a solo trip for January. I bought a new pair of running shoes. I even called an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. It wasn't about escaping them. It was about rediscovering me. Still, every night before bed, I opened the mortgage account just to see. The payments were still on time because I hadn't missed one yet, but the next Friday that would change. I thought about Danny's smirk during that video call, the sound of laughter echoing behind him, and my mother's cheerful "we made too much food." It no longer hurt. It just reminded me why I was doing this. People think betrayal feels like fire. It doesn't. It's ice slow creeping, numbing everything, until you can finally move without shaking. By the end of those 2 weeks, I was ready. I set a reminder on my phone Friday. Do nothing. The simplest task I'd ever assigned myself. I stared at the screen, feeling something close to peace. They had always treated me like an obligation, a dependable source of cash with a polite smile attached. But I was more than that. Much more. I turned off my phone, leaned back in the chair and exhaled. They thought I was a wallet with a heartbeat. They were about to find out I was a woman with a spine. December 15th arrived like any other Friday, quiet and grey. At 6 a.m, my alarm went off as usual, and muscle memory guided me straight to the laptop before I even had coffee. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type the same thing I had typed for the last 2.5 years, 850. Mortgage support. That little ritual had become so ingrained it almost felt like breathing something automatic, unexamined and expected. But that morning, I stopped myself. My hand trembled slightly as I closed the banking app without sending the transfer. The silence that followed wasn't loud, but it had weight, a kind of stillness that pressed against the walls of my apartment. I made coffee, but it tasted different, bitterer somehow. Every sip was a reminder that I had broken the pattern. The day passed slowly, measured by the pulse of anxiety in my chest. I kept expecting my phone to ring for one of them to notice immediately. But it didn't. Not that day, not the next. I went to work, handled meeting, smiled when necessary. Outside Christmas lights blinked on every building, everyone rushing through last-minute shopping. I was part of the world again, no longer tethered by invisible strings that pulled me toward their needs. But at night, when the apartment went quiet, a part of me still listened for the phone. On the 4th day, it finally rang. I saw Dad flash across the screen. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hey, honey," he said, his tone casual, rehearsed. "How are things up there in Denver?" "Fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just busy with year-end reports." "Oh, I hear you," he said, chuckling softly. "Listen, I was just wondering, did you forget to send the money this week?" "Maybe the bank glitched again." He said it kindly, like he was talking about weather, as if this were a small mistake, an oversight easily fixed. For years I had folded myself into that tone, eager to reassure, to fix, to make everything smooth. But not this time. "No, Dad," I said quietly. "I didn't forget." There was a pause. Just silence, the kind that stretches too long between two people who know exactly what's being said, but can't admit it. "Oh," he said finally. "Well, okay. Maybe you're just a little behind, that's all." "No," I said again, sharper now. "I'm not behind, I just didn't send it." Another pause. "You sound tired," he said softly, as though that explained everything. "Maybe we can talk when you've had some rest." "Sure," I said, because it was easier than arguing. We hung up. I stared at the blank screen of my phone for a long time afterward. The conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes, but my hands were shaking like I'd just stepped off a battlefield. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was the adrenaline of defiance, the first taste of what it felt like to stand my ground. 2 hours later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Mum. Her name on the screen felt heavier. I took a breath before answering. "Hi, Mum." Her voice came sharp and strained, the politeness gone. "We need money for utilities, April. The gas bill came today, and your father's trying to handle things, but we're short. Can you please send what you owe?" "What I owe?" I repeated, my voice steady but colder than I intended. "Mum, I don't owe you. I've been sending money every week for years, and we've been using it to keep this house running," she snapped. "Do you think we're rolling in cash? You know how much your father's medication costs?" "I do," I said. "I paid for it." "Don't take that tone with me," she said, voice rising. "You think you can just stop helping because you're angry about Thanksgiving. That's childish, April. Families fight, then they move on." I pressed my fingers to my temple, closing my eyes. "It's not about Thanksgiving, Mum." "Then what is it?" she demanded. "What could possibly make you act like this?" I took a slow breath. "I found the transfer papers, the ones you filed to give the house to Danny." The silence on the line was instant and complete. Then her voice came back lower, defensive. You weren't supposed to see that. I wasn't supposed to see it, I repeated. You tried to cut me out of something I've been paying for. Do you even hear yourself? It's not what you think, she said quickly. We just thought it made sense for Danny to inherit, I cut in. To care for you in your old age. You mean the son who doesn't have a job who crashed the car. I bought you, who's been living off my money, while you call him your miracle. Don't speak about your brother like that, she snapped. He's family. So am I said quietly. Or at least I thought I was. She sighed loudly, the sound sharp and exasperated. You're overreacting. You've always been dramatic. We've depended on you because you're the responsible one. That's how families work. Everyone has their role. Maybe I'm done playing mine, I said. Maybe I want to see what happens when everyone actually has to carry their own weight. Her voice cracked with disbelief. You can't just stop, April. We're your parents. And I'm your daughter, I said softly. But that never seemed to count. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear her breathing fast and shallow. When she finally spoke again, her tone had shifted colder, more deliberate. You'll regret this, she said. You don't turn your back on family, not without consequences. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. The guilt, the manipulation, the expectation that I would fold the moment she pushed hard enough. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll be free. She started to say something else, but I didn't wait to hear it. I hung up before she could finish. For the first time in 33 years, I chose my peace over their comfort. In the days that followed, the silence between us became a presence of its own thick humming, almost alive. No calls, no texts, just absence. The kind that demands to be noticed. I went through my week like nothing had happened, answering emails, attending meetings, laughing at small jokes from co-workers, but inside I was counting down. I knew what came next. You can't pull away money that's held a family together for years without consequence. The storm was coming, and for once, I wasn't running from it. On the morning of December 22nd, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, and a single window pulled up a blank document titled Notice of Payment Termination. I took a breath and began typing. Dear Mum and Dad, I wrote, effective immediately, I will no longer be making mortgage payments on your behalf. You must resume full payment responsibility of £2 per month. The next payment is due January 5th. If unpaid, the account will enter delinquency and the lender will issue foreclosure notice within 90 days. I recommend you contact the bank to set up your own payment plan. I paused reading it back. The tone was professional, almost cold. That was intentional. I wanted there to be no room for emotion, no space for guilt to slip back in. At the end, I added one more line. This decision is final. I printed 2 copies, one for the record, one to mail. When I signed my name at the bottom, something inside me shifted. It didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like truth. By noon, the letter was in the mailbox. The rest of the day moved quietly. I went through the motions at work, finished reports, even joined a virtual meeting with my team where someone wore a Santa hat. Everyone joked about the holidays. I smiled when appropriate. But beneath that calm surface, my mind kept circling back to that letter, travelling hundreds of miles south to their mailbox, imagining the exact moment they'd open it. I pictured Mum's gasp, Dad's frown, the confusion giving way to outrage. At 6 p.m, my phone began to ring. Dad's name flashed across the screen. I didn't answer. It rang again, then again. 8 times in a row, each call more insistent than the last. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages came next. First, honey, please call me. There must be some mistake. The bank just called. They said the payment hasn't gone through. What's happening? Then 30 seconds later, April, we need to talk. This isn't funny. By 7 o'clock, my phone was buzzing non-stop. Texts started pouring in. Dad, the bank called. What Did you do, Mum? You're going to make us lose the house. Danny, what the fuck is wrong with you? I read each message carefully, my heart steady. No one asked if I was okay, no one asked why. Just accusation, panic, and entitlement. All the emotions that surface when control starts slipping away. I set the phone on the table face down and poured myself a glass of red wine. The sound of it filling the glass was strangely comforting, a small act of normalcy in the middle of chaos. I took a sip, leaned back, and stared out the window. The city outside glowed with Christmas lights, all warm golds and reds against the night sky. Somewhere below, I could hear people laughing, the muffled joy of strangers living lives untouched by my family's unravelling. The phone buzzed again, 32 unread messages now. I turned it over for a moment, watching the notifications roll across the screen. Dad's voice message icon blinked. I could almost hear the tone, already half pleading, half furious. Then Mum's messages stacked one after another, alternating between guilt and threats. How could you do this to us? We're your parents. After all we've done for you. The irony wasn't lost on me. All they'd done was take. And the moment I stopped giving, they made it sound like betrayal. I stood up, carrying the glass with me to the living room. The glow from the Christmas tree I'd barely decorated cast faint reflections on the wall. I sat on the couch and exhaled. For the first time in years, my body felt still. No constant tension in my shoulders, no invisible leash pulling me toward their expectations. Just quiet. At some point, the buzzing stopped. Then it started again, new number this time. Danny. I could picture him pacing, furious, playing the role of the golden son defending the family. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail anyway. When I played it later, his voice was sharp with anger. You've lost it, April. Mum's crying, Dad's panicking. Do you even care? You're going to destroy everything. You think you're proving a point. You're proving you're heartless. Heartless. I smiled faintly at that. It wasn't heartless to stop being used. It was human. It was overdue. By 10 p.m, the number of missed calls had climbed past 40. I watched them stack up, feeling oddly detached, like I was observing someone else's life. Maybe, in a way, I was. The old version of me, the one who jumped to fix to pay to please, would have been crying by now, frantically wiring money to calm everyone down. But that April was gone. I picked up my phone one last time just to look at it. The lock screen was lit with notifications, missed calls, texts, voicemails, each one a reminder of the noise I'd chosen to escape. I took another slow sip of wine, letting the taste linger. When I finally turned the phone face down again, I felt something close to peace. Not joy exactly, but release, the kind that comes when you realise the world doesn't collapse just because you stopped holding it up. That night, I had 47 missed calls. I turned my phone off, poured a glass of wine, and slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I woke to silence. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, the kind of winter light that made everything look softer than it really was. For a brief moment, I forgot. Then, I turned on my phone. The screen lit up like a warning signal, dozens of missed calls, unread texts, new voicemails. The count at the top of the screen read 29. By noon, it would double. At first, I didn't listen. I told myself I'd already heard enough from them to last a lifetime. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. Around midday, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen counter, and pressed play. The first voicemail was from Dad. Honey, please, just call me back. We can figure this out. Your mum's upset, but she'll calm down once we talk. His voice trembled at the edges the way it used to, when he couldn't control a situation. The second was Mum crying, April, you're breaking your parents' hearts. How could you do this right before Christmas? We raised you better than this. The guilt was immediate, instinctive. It hit like a reflex, something I'd been trained to feel since childhood. I took a sip of coffee and let it pass. Then came Danny. Unbelievable, he hissed. You think you're some kind of hero? You're not. You're cruel. I swear if you don't fix this, I'll sue you. You think the house is yours. It's not. "You're done." I deleted that one without finishing it. But they kept coming. Aunt Linda's voice next, soft, hesitant, almost pleading. "April, sweetheart, your parents are crying all day. I don't know what happened, but they're hurting. Maybe just send something to help for now. You can sort it out later." There it was again, the gentle manipulation wrapped in care. The idea that my role was still to fix, to soothe, to bend. I pressed delete again. By evening, I'd received 41 voicemails, each one a different note in the same old song. Dad tried calm reasoning. Mum alternated between sobbing and silence. Danny's tone grew more furious, as though yelling louder would turn back time. One message stood out. Mum's voice steady now, no tears left. "If you don't send the money in 24 hours, she said, don't expect to see us again." The chill in her tone made my stomach twist. It wasn't heartbreak, it was control. A mother's version of an ultimatum. I set the phone down and stared at the lights on the small Christmas tree I'd put up out of habit. I hadn't bothered to decorate it properly, just a few white lights and one gold ornament. It looked lonely, but peaceful. I realised that for the first time in years, I wasn't spending Christmas worrying about them. I was simply existing. The next morning, Christmas Eve, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating non-stop. The notifications blurred together, voicemails, texts, missed calls. By midday, the total number hit 63. I didn't have the energy to listen to them all. I went for a walk instead. The streets were quiet, the air sharp and cold. Families passed me, laughing arms full of wrapped gifts. The sight should have made me feel empty. It didn't. It made me feel human again. When I got home, I finally opened the voicemail inbox. The phone asked play new messages. I pressed yes. The first was from Dad again. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "Your mother won't eat. She won't talk to me. You've always been the strong one, April. Please fix this." His voice cracked on the last word. I paused, listening to the faint hum of background noise. It sounded like the kitchen at home, the clinking of dishes, the low hum of their refrigerator. For a moment, I was 10 again, standing by the table, waiting for approval that never came. The next message was shorter clipped. "You're selfish," Mum said. "We made sacrifices for you, and this is how you repay us." Another followed immediately after, her tone colder. "Maybe Danny was right about you." I stopped listening halfway through. I didn't need to hear the rest. I scrolled further down the list until I reached one from Aunt Linda. "Honey," she said softly, "they're saying you're doing this out of spite. I told them you're not that kind of person. Please just call your mother. She needs to hear your voice." I let that one play out in silence, my jaw tightening. The version of me they wanted, the compliant daughter, the quiet giver, was gone. They just hadn't realised it yet. I poured another cup of coffee and stood by the window as the final message played. It wasn't a family voice this time. It was calm, professional. "Hello, this is St. Mary's Hospital, calling for Miss April Martinez. Your mother, Miss Elena Martinez, was admitted earlier this evening for chest pain. She's stable at the moment and is asking for you." The message ended there. I stood frozen, my hand still on the counter. For a second, everything around me went still, the hum of the fridge, the ticking clock, even my own heartbeat. The words echoed in my mind. "She's stable but asking for you." I walked to the table, sat down and replayed it. Twice. The same soft, detached tone. Admitted for chest pain. I stared at the screen, trying to feel something certain. Relief that she was alive. Fear that I'd pushed too far. Or maybe anger that it took a hospital bed for her to finally want me near. None of it settled right. I imagined her, there pale and trembling, telling nurses about her ungrateful daughter who ruined Christmas. I imagined Dad pacing the hallway, calling me from a waiting room phone. Danny sitting with his arms crossed, glaring at the floor. They'd turn even this into a story about my cruelty. And the worst part was, a small piece of me still wanted to run to her, to prove I wasn't heartless, that I still cared. But another part of me, the part that had grown solid these past few weeks, stayed seated. I wasn't the cause of her pain. I was just the mirror, reflecting it back. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, tears streaming down my face. Was justice supposed to feel this much like cruelty? I didn't sleep that night. The words from the hospital voicemail kept replaying in my head. She's stable, but asking for you. It was strange hearing that phrase after weeks of silence. Asking for me. The same woman who couldn't make space for me at her Thanksgiving table now wanted me by her bedside. By 1 a.m, I couldn't stand the stillness anymore. I packed a small bag, grabbed my keys, and left. The drive from Denver to Austin was 7 hours of black highway and empty thoughts. Snow gave way to bare fields, then the long, endless stretch of Texas road that I knew too well. The hum of the tires was the only sound in the car. I didn't play music, didn't make calls. I just drove, replaying the last few weeks. In my mind, the texts, the silence, the discovery of the house papers. My emotions shifted like the landscape: anger, guilt, fear, resolve. Around hour 5, fatigue hit, but I pushed through. I wasn't sure what I expected when I got there. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe a fight. Maybe both. By the time I pulled into the hospital parking lot, it was just past 2 a.m. The fluorescent lights flickered above the entrance, washing everything in pale blue. I parked, sat for a moment, and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were swollen, my face drawn. I looked like someone halfway between daughter and stranger. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and coffee. The night nurse at the desk glanced up as I approached. "Visiting hours are over," she said gently. "I'm here for my mother," I replied. "Elena Martinez. I got a call." She checked her computer, nodded. "Room 214. Family's already here." Family. The word stung. I thanked her quietly and made my way down the corridor. The hallway was silent except for the soft beeping of monitors behind closed doors. When I reached the room, the door was slightly open. I could hear murmurs, my father's low voice, Danny's sharper one. I pushed the door open slowly. Mum was lying in the hospital bed, pale against the white sheets. Tubes snaked around her arm, the heart monitor blinking steady green. Dad sat in a chair beside her, hands folded tightly, while Danny stood near the foot of the bed, arms crossed, eyes red from exhaustion or anger. When they saw me, the room froze. Danny was the first to speak. "Satisfied now," he said bitterly. His voice was quiet, but it cut like glass. I met his glare without flinching. "I didn't come here to fight," I said softly. "Then why are you here?" he snapped. "You got what you wanted. She's sick, we're broke, and it's all your fault." Dad put a hand on his shoulder. "Danny, stop." But he didn't. "No, she should hear it," he said, pointing at me. "You decided you were done paying, and now look what happened. Merry Christmas, April." I stepped forward, keeping my tone even. "I'm here because I care about her, even if none of you believe that." Mum stirred, her voice faint. "April." I moved closer to the bed. "Hi, Mum. I'm here." She blinked slowly, eyes glassy with medication. "You drove all the way." "Yes, I said. 7 hours." She sighed, almost relieved. "I knew you'd come, no matter what happened." "You knew," I said quietly. "Then why did it take a hospital bed for you to call me, Hercule?" Her gaze flickered away. "You want an apology about Thanksgiving?" "No," I said. "I want to understand. Why you tried to transfer the house to Danny without telling me." The room went still. The heart monitor kept its steady rhythm, the only sound in the air. Dad looked at the floor. Mum's fingers tightened around the blanket. Danny exhaled sharply and turned away, muttering something under his breath. "I saw the documents," I said, my voice steady but low. "The ones from August. You filed to move the title into Danny's name. You were going to give away the house I've been paying for. Why?" No one answered. I waited, searching their faces for any trace of honesty, of regret. Mum's lips pressed together. Dad rubbed his temples. Danny's jaw clenched. You weren't supposed to see that, Mum said finally. Her tone was soft, but not remorseful, just tired. It wasn't about you. It was literally about me, I said. My name's on the mortgage. You have your own life, she said. Danny doesn't. He's here. He takes care of us. I laughed quietly, bitterly. Takes care of you? He hasn't had a job in 3 years. You've been living off my money. Don't talk about your brother that way, she snapped, her voice rising despite the machines around her. He's family. So am I said. At least I thought I was. The silence that followed was sharp, heavy. Dad finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We thought it made sense, April. You have more than you need. Danny doesn't. It's not personal. Not personal, I repeated, staring at him. You erased me from my own family and called it practical. He looked down again, unable to meet my eyes. You've always been strong, he said quietly. We figured you'd understand. Understand being betrayed, I said. Being replaced. Mum turned her face toward the wall. We didn't mean to hurt you, she said. We just thought you'd be fine. The words hit harder than any argument. We just thought you'd be fine. That was their entire philosophy of me. The reliable daughter, the problem solver, the invisible foundation they could keep standing on without ever looking down. I felt my throat tighten, but I forced my voice to stay calm. You could have just asked, I said. You could have told me what you wanted. Instead, you hid it. Because we knew you'd make it difficult, Danny said, turning back toward me. You always do. Difficult, I said, my voice breaking slightly. You mean I ask questions that I don't roll over when you take what isn't yours? This isn't about you, he shot back. It's about what's fair. Fair, I repeated, laughing softly. You wouldn't know fair if it lived in your house, rent-free. Which, by the way, you do. He glared at me, face flushed, then muttered something I couldn't hear and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving only the quiet hum of machines. I turned back to my parents. Was he right? I asked softly. Is that what you all think? That I deserved this? Neither of them answered. Dad stared at the floor, his hands clasped tightly. Mum's eyes were closed now, turned away. I waited for a word. Any word, but there was nothing. Just the sound of the monitor beeping, steadily indifferent to human truth. I stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of that silence. It was more than shame. It was confirmation. Everything I'd suspected about where I stood in this family was right there in that moment, unspoken, but undeniable. That silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It confirmed everything I'd suspected and broke something I didn't know could still break. For a long time, no one moved. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the air, its rhythm too calm for what hung between us. My mother kept her face turned toward the wall, her shoulders rigid beneath the thin hospital blanket. My father sat with his hands clasped tightly in his lap, staring at the floor as if the tiles might offer an escape. I stood near the foot of the bed, unable to speak, unable to leave. When Danny had stormed out, the air felt cleaner but heavier too. I wasn't angry anymore. I was hollow. That silence had taken the fight right out of me. Then faintly, Mum spoke. When you were 19, she said, her voice trembling, you left for Denver. You packed your bags and you didn't even look back. Your father had just lost his job. We needed you most. I blinked, caught off guard. What, you left? She repeated, her tone more forceful now. You went chasing that scholarship, that career, while we were drowning here. I stared at her, stunned. You told me to go, I said. You told me I was a burden. You said, if you're so smart, go make it on your own. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I could see the words replaying in her eyes. She remembered. I was angry, she whispered. You were a child. You didn't understand what it meant to hold a family together. I understood enough, I said quietly. I understood that you wanted me gone. She turned to face me, then her eyes wet but unflinching. We were ashamed, she said suddenly. The words caught me off guard. Ashamed, your father and I, she continued. We were ashamed. Our daughter so young, so ambitious, getting everything we never could. Every dollar you sent home was a reminder that we'd failed. Do you know what it feels like to depend on your own child? Her voice cracked on the last word. It's not pride, April. It's humiliation. My father shifted in his chair but said nothing. I watched him press his palms together, his knuckles white. That's why you did it, I said softly. The house transfer, the favoritism, the silence. It wasn't about Danny, it was about your pride. Mum flinched. It was about balance, she said weakly. Danny stayed. He struggled, yes, but he stayed. You left. You built a life without us. I tried to include you, I said. I called. I sent money. I flew home for every holiday I could until you made me feel like a guest in my own family. She looked away again, eyes glistening. You think it's that simple, that money and visits erase what was lost? Her voice softened, almost breaking. You don't understand, April. There's more to it than you know. Then tell me, I said. Because right now, all I see is cruelty disguised as family. She hesitated, her lips trembling. My mother left me, she said finally. The words came out small, almost like a confession. What I whispered. When I was 6, she said in Vietnam, she took my brother to America and left me behind. Said it was safer that way. Said she'd send for me later. She never did. Her eyes unfocused as though watching a movie only she could see. I waited years for her letters. They stopped coming. I grew up with that emptiness inside me, that question of why I wasn't chosen. I didn't know what to say. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. When I finally came to America, she went on, I swore I'd never abandon my children. No matter what happened, I'd keep my family together. But when you left for Denver, it felt like history repeating. I saw myself in you, the daughter left behind. Only this time, I was the one being left. Her voice faltered, but she kept going. So I held on to Danny. Too tightly, maybe. I couldn't lose him too. I thought if I kept him close, the family would stay whole. Even if it meant losing me, I asked softly. She winced. I didn't realize I was pushing you away. I thought I was protecting what was left, by giving him everything and pretending I didn't exist, by surviving, the only way I knew how, she said. Through control, through tradition, through keeping one child safe, even if it meant letting the other drift. My father's eyes filled, but he stayed silent. The truth hung between us like smoke, heavy, suffocating, but undeniable. You thought love meant holding on, I said, but all you did was build a cage. Her eyes met mine then, and for the first time in years, I saw something real behind them. Fear, regret, the fragile remains of guilt. Maybe I did, she whispered, but when you stopped sending the money, when I realized I couldn't control you anymore, I didn't know who I was without that power. She closed her eyes. I wasn't angry at you. I was angry at myself. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding. I had imagined so many reasons for what they'd done, greed, favoritism, resentment, but not this. Shame, wounded pride passed down like inheritance. You always thought I was cold, she said quietly, but I wasn't cold, April. I was terrified. Terrified of losing both my children the way I lost my mother. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. You didn't have to lose me, I said. You just had to see me. A tear slipped down her cheek, disappearing into the pillow. I see you now, she whispered. Too late, I said, but there was no anger left in it. Just sadness. A tired, aching sadness for everything we could have been if she'd healed before she raised us. My father finally spoke, his voice low and cracked. She's telling you the truth, he said. We were broken long before you knew what that word meant. We brought that into our family, and didn't even realize it. I looked at him, then at her. Generations of silence, of unspoken pain, all converging in one sterile hospital room. It wasn't love that had built our family. It was survival. So that's what this was about, I said finally, more to myself than to them. Not love, not fairness, just shame dressed up as tradition and trauma I never knew existed. For a long moment after saying that, the room remained still. The weight of my mother's confession hung in the sterile air pressing against my chest. She turned her face away, again, her breath shallow and uneven. My father rubbed his temples, eyes closed, as if praying for the strength to rewind time. I couldn't stay there any longer. Every word, every revelation had peeled another layer off the story I thought I knew. I had come to this hospital seeking closure, maybe even reconciliation. What I got instead was the anatomy of a wound, one carved long before I was born. When the nurse came in to check the monitors, I took that as my cue to leave. I told myself I needed air, but the truth was I couldn't bear another minute in that room. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and regret. I walked toward the elevator, clutching my coat, each step echoing louder than the last. I was almost at the lobby when a man in a grey suit called my name. Ms. Martinez. He held a leather briefcase and an envelope, his expression polite but cautious. Yes, I said, wary. I'm sorry to bother you here, he said, but your mother asked me to deliver this to you personally. I blinked, confused. My mother? Yes, he said, extending the envelope. I'm her attorney. I took it slowly, the hospital's fluorescent lights reflecting off the crisp white paper. Attorney, I repeated, my voice tight. What is this about? He hesitated, glancing down at his clipboard. It's a legal notice. A civil suit filed by your parents. My pulse quickened. A lawsuit? He nodded, opening his briefcase to retrieve a duplicate. They're requesting a declaration of ownership rights over the property on Willow Creek. They claim that your financial contributions were voluntary gifts, not investments, and that you have no legal standing to withdraw support. I stared at him, disbelief flooding through me. They're suing me for stopping payments on their house. He shifted uncomfortably. Technically, they're asserting prior ownership. According to the claim, they paid the mortgage for 15 years before your involvement, and therefore maintain full equitable rights. Equitable rights, I repeated, the words tasting metallic. So, after everything, after years of helping, they're turning it into a legal fight. He gave a small rehearsed sigh. It's complicated. Family matters usually are. I felt my throat tighten. How long have you represented them? I asked. He hesitated again, and that pause told me more than any sentence could. About 2 months, he said finally. Mrs. Martinez reached out in late September. We began preparing the documents in October. My stomach dropped. Wait, I said slowly. That's before Thanksgiving. He froze, realizing what he'd said. Perhaps I shouldn't have. But it was too late. The realization hit like a cold wave. They had planned this, the exclusion, the distance, even the fake civility. They hadn't cut me out impulsively. They'd been building a wall of paperwork protecting themselves from me while I was still sending money every week. She knew, I whispered. She knew all along. The lawyer adjusted his tie, uncomfortable under my stare. I'm just the messenger, Ms. Martinez. I hope you understand. I didn't answer. My hands were trembling, but my voice came out calm. Tell me something, I said. When she hired you, did she tell you I was the one making the payments for the last 3 years? It's noted in the file, he said carefully. But the argument is that those payments were voluntary family assistance, not contractual obligations. You weren't a listed owner, only a co-signer. I let out a hollow laugh. So she's suing me for generosity? He didn't respond. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, envelope still clutched in my hand. The ride down felt endless. When the doors opened to the lobby, I moved through the crowd in a daze. Outside, the night air was cold enough to sting. I sank onto a bench near the parking lot and tore open the envelope. The words blurred at first. Complaint for declaratory relief. The next lines cut sharper than any insult. Plaintiffs Miguel and Teresa Martinez. Defendant April Martinez. The legal language felt sterile, detached, but underneath it pulsed the same wound control disguised as love. I flipped to the second page, where my mother's signature sat neatly above the date November 2nd. I felt my breath catch, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, before the text that shattered everything. I leaned back, staring at the hospital's lit windows. In one of those rooms, my mother lay resting, pretending to be fragile while setting legal traps. The betrayal wasn't emotional anymore. It was strategic. A campaign months in the making. A nurse passed by and asked if I was all right. I nodded, forcing a smile. Just tired, I said. She smiled back and walked inside, unaware that my entire sense of family had just been filed in triplicate. I sat there for a long time, the cold biting through my coat, the lawsuit heavy in my lap. My thoughts drifted back to the conversation in that hospital room. The tears, the trembling voice, the confessions that had almost made me believe healing was possible. I realized now they weren't confessions. They were rehearsals. Carefully chosen words to soften me to make the blow seem like misunderstanding instead of betrayal. I looked up again at the building. Through the glass, I could see my mother's room faintly lit. She was turned away from the window, her profile hidden behind the IV stand. I waited, half hoping she'd glance up and meet my eyes. She didn't. Maybe she knew I was there. Maybe that was why she couldn't look. The lawyer's voice echoed in my head. She contacted me 2 months ago. I closed the file, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger this time, not grief, but clarity. All my life I had been fighting for fairness, for acknowledgement, for love that was conditional on proving my worth. But this wasn't a fight about love. It never had been. It was about control, about ownership. And suddenly, I understood why nothing I'd done had ever been enough. I stood clutching the envelope one last time, then slipped it into my bag. I looked at my mother through the hospital window. She wouldn't meet my eyes. And I realized I'd been fighting the wrong battle all along. When I boarded the plane back to Denver 2 days later, the envelope with the lawsuit sat in my bag like a ticking bomb. Outside the window, the Texas plains disappeared beneath the clouds, but the weight of betrayal followed me all the way home. I spent most of that flight staring at the seat back in front of me, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with my parents, looking for signs of what I'd missed. I had fought so hard to be understood when all along they had already chosen their story and written me out of it. By January, the shock had hardened into resolve. I took 2 weeks off work, not to rest, but to fight. I researched law firms that specialized in family property disputes and financial exploitation. On a cold Tuesday morning, I walked into a quiet office near downtown Denver. The receptionist led me to a room lined with law books and framed degrees. That's where I met Margaret Doyle, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a calm that made me feel for the first time in months that I wasn't losing my mind. She extended her hand. "April, right, come in. I read the preliminary details you sent over. Quite a situation." I sat down across from her, unfolding the file I had spent all weekend assembling. 2.5 years of bank statements showing every transfer printouts of my mother's emails about joint ownership and the text that started it all. "We already had Thanksgiving. You can come later for a photo." Margaret flipped through each page methodically, nodding slowly. "You've documented everything." "Yes," I said. "Every dollar, every message." She tapped one of the statements. "And these weekly $850 payments, they were never required by contract, no. I just did it because they needed help. I thought it was the right thing." She leaned back in her chair. "April, I've been practicing family law for 25 years. This," she pointed to my stack of papers, "is the cleanest case of financial exploitation I've seen." Her tone was steady professional, but I felt tears sting behind my eyes. "So, I'm not crazy," I whispered. She gave a small, knowing smile. "No, you're not crazy. You're generous. and they took advantage of that. For the next hour, she explained how the law actually worked, how voluntary support had no binding obligation, how the attempted transfer without my signature was invalid, how their claim of prior ownership couldn't erase documented payments that maintained the property. So legally, I asked, they can't force me to keep paying. Not even close, she said. They can't sue you for stopping something you never owed. They can file the paperwork, sure, but it won't hold. Their lawyer knows that too. I frowned. Then why go through all this control, she said simply. They're not trying to win in court. They're trying to scare you back into compliance. Her words hit harder than I expected. I had always known control was part of it, but hearing someone name it so clearly made it real. Margaret continued flipping through the emails. You mentioned your brother Danny. Yes, I said quietly. He still lives with them. They've always protected him. He's the favourite. She gave a soft sigh, looking at me not with pity, but recognition. 20 years ago, I was you. I looked up. What do you mean, I sent money to my parents too? She said, leaning back in her chair. Paid off their debts, fixed their roof, helped my younger brother through college. Then one day, I found out the house I'd been paying for was being transferred into his name. My mother said it was for convenience. She smiled faintly, though her eyes looked far away. It took me a long time to realise what that really meant. I leaned forward. What did you do? I stopped, she said, completely. It nearly broke me at first, but I learnt something through that pain. She folded her hands on the table. You can't buy love, April. You can only rent obligation, and the rent always goes up. The words sank deep. For a moment, I didn't respond. I just sat there letting that truth settle in the cracks of everything I thought I knew about family. She continued more softly now. The hardest part of breaking free isn't the anger, it's the grief. You're mourning the version of your parents you hoped existed. I nodded slowly. I think I already started that mourning. Good, she said. Because grief means acceptance. Acceptance means clarity. And clarity wins cases. We spent the next 2 hours organising evidence. She highlighted payment dates, annotated emails, and marked key messages showing my parents' reliance on me. Her precision was surgical. Her tone calm but firm. Watching her work gave me something I hadn't felt in weak structure. At one point, she looked up and said, You know what's remarkable? You didn't cut them off in anger. You gave them every chance to treat you like family. They chose to treat you like a bank instead. That matters in court and in healing, I smiled faintly. It doesn't feel remarkable, it feels pathetic. It's not pathetic, she said, it's human. You wanted love to be enough, they wanted proof. That's not your failure. When we finished, she slid a copy of the legal brief across the table. I'll file this by the end of the week. Once they receive our response, their lawyer will realise they don't have a leg to stand on. I nodded, my hands steady for the first time in months. And if they don't back down, then we make it public, she said. Financial records, transaction history, everything. You've done nothing wrong. I hesitated, staring at the folder between us. It feels strange, I said. After everything they've done, I still don't want to destroy them. She smiled gently. You don't have to destroy them. Just stop letting them destroy you. The words hit me like a choir anthem. I gathered my papers, feeling both exhausted and lighter somehow. As I stood to leave, Margaret said softly, You know, when I first read your file, I thought of my daughter. She's around your age. If she ever went through something like this, I'd want her to have someone remind her she deserves better. Something in my chest cracked open at that. For months, I'd been invisible, first to my family, then to myself. But in that quiet office across from a woman who had lived my story decades before me, I felt seen. As I stepped into the cold Denver afternoon snow beginning to fall, I realised something had shifted. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the life I had built with my own hands. For the first time, someone saw me. Not as a daughter, not as a wallet, but as a woman who deserved better. The last sentence of the previous part was, "For the first time, someone saw me. Not as a daughter, not as a wallet, but as a woman who deserved better." By February, Denver was buried under grey skies and half-melted snow. The holidays had come and gone without a single word from my parents. The silence felt less like peace and more like a void, but at least it was my own. Margaret and I met every Tuesday in her office, a ritual that had become both therapy and battle planning. She had filed the defence motion, and the court had acknowledged the pending dispute. The next phase, she explained, was discovery, the process of unearthing the truth through documents, audits, and records. That word, discovery, stuck with me. For the first time in months, it sounded like something I wanted. Not revenge, not justification, just truth in black and white. Margaret sat across from me, glasses perched low on her nose, typing on her laptop. "We'll need access to the original mortgage statements, your bank transfer logs, and their current financial accounts," she said. "If they used your money, there'll be a trail." I handed her a folder of printouts. Already compiled. 2.5 years of transfers from my account to theirs. She smiled faintly. "Good. Let's see what they did with it." The audit began 2 weeks later. Margaret had an accountant on her team, an older man named Paul who spoke in numbers, the way poets spoke in metaphors. He explained everything patiently, showing me how to read transaction logs, how to spot inconsistencies. Every deposit and withdrawal told a story. On a Friday morning, Margaret called me. "You might want to come in," she said. "We found something." Her tone was calm, but I could hear the undercurrent. The restrained excitement of someone who'd just turned over a stone and found what she was looking for. When I arrived, she had 2 printed spreadsheets laid out on her desk. Rows of transactions stretched across the page, each one a small betrayal waiting to be translated. She pointed to one line highlighted in yellow. "Look here, October 11th. An 18 to 1,000 transfer from your mother's account to a Marcus Chen. Does that name mean anything to you?" It took me a moment, then it hit me. Marcus. He's Danny's friend, the one who used to borrow money for poker tournaments. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Poker, gambling," I said flatly. "Danny said he quit years ago." Paul looked up from his laptop. "Well, Marcus Chen seems to have received several payments from that account over the last 6 months. Smaller ones, too, 500 here, 1,000 there. This $18 to $1,000 is just the largest." I felt my stomach twist. "So, my mother's been giving Danny's gambling buddy money with my transfers?" Margaret nodded slowly. "That's what it looks like?" For a while, the room was quiet, except for the hum of the fluorescent light. I stared at the spreadsheet, the line of numbers glowing like a confession. $18,000. That was nearly 3 months of payments. 3 months of me working late, cutting corners, making sure my parents had everything they needed while they were feeding my brother's addiction. Margaret cleared her throat softly. "There's more." I looked up. "More." She slid another page towards me, this one marked in red. $25,000 transferred last spring to something called the Rodriguez Family Trust. "Any idea who they are?" I shook my head. "No, we don't have relatives with that name." "Then it's worth finding out," she said. Paul leaned over. "That trust account is based in Houston. It's not a common structure, usually used by families managing private assets. We'll pull the registration records." I nodded my chest tight. The numbers on the page blurred. 25,000. I didn't even make that in 2 months after taxes. My parents had always claimed to be struggling, barely getting by, as my mother liked to say. And yet, here was evidence of generosity I never received. 2 days later, Margaret called again. Her voice was careful, deliberate. "April, we identified the Rodriguez Family Trust. You might want to sit down for this." I did. "The trustee," she said, "is registered to a family in San Antonio. The same last name as a man your mother listed as her emergency contact on one of her earlier hospital admissions. I blinked. Wait, what? My father was alive and present. Why would she list another man I did some digging? Margaret said quietly. The man's name is Eduardo Rodriguez. From what I can tell, he was your mother's ex-boyfriend. They dated before she met your father. The trust belongs to his family. I felt the blood drain from my face. Are you saying my mother was sending my money to her ex-boyfriend's family? Margaret hesitated, then nodded. According to the transfers, yes. The payments were labelled as personal loans, but the bank flagged them as non-repayable contributions. There's no record of any repayment plan. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing. All those nights I stayed up making sure the mortgage payment cleared, thinking I was doing something noble, something loving, and she was wiring thousands to the Rodriguez family. I laughed softly, the kind of laugh that only comes when disbelief turns into numbness. So let me get this straight, I said. While I was sending money to help them keep their house, she was giving it to Danny's gambling buddy and her old lover's family. Margaret didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence said enough. Paul exhaled. This isn't just unethical, he said. It's potentially criminal misappropriation of funds, especially since the money originated from you. Margaret nodded. It strengthens your case, April. But I know that's not much comfort. Comfort wasn't even on the table. What I felt wasn't anger, it was erosion. Years of loyalty dissolving in a single revelation. The betrayal was so intricate it almost felt artistic. I stood and walked to the window, watching snow drift across the street. Do you know what's funny? I said quietly. I used to tell myself they just didn't understand what I did for them, that maybe they took it for granted because love makes people blind. But this isn't blindness. This is calculation. Margaret stood beside me, her voice soft but steady. You've been living in a system that taught you guilt was love. Breaking that pattern is painful. But now you have proof, something they can't twist or deny. I nodded, though I barely heard her. My mind was back in that tiny apartment on Thanksgiving night when I ate a frozen dinner and told myself it didn't matter, that maybe one day they'd see. But now, seeing wasn't what I wanted. I wanted distance, freedom, silence that didn't ache. As I gathered my things to leave, Paul said, We'll prepare this for court, but are you sure you want to pursue it all the way? I looked at him. They started a war over money, I said. They should at least face the truth about where it went. Outside, the sun was setting behind the snow-capped buildings, the sky bruised with colour. I walked to my car, the air sharp against my skin. For the first time, I didn't feel like the invisible daughter, or the guilty one. I felt like someone finally pulling the curtain back on her own life. When I got home that night, I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and scrolled through the audit again. Chen $18,000 to Marcus Chen, $25,000 to the Rodriguez Family Trust. Each line was a tiny confession typed in ink. I thought of my mother's tearful hospital voice, the trembling hands, the words about fear and family, and wondered if any of it had been real. So while I was eating TV dinners alone, my money was funding my brother's gambling and my mother's secret charity to another family. How poetic. The last sentence of the previous part was, so while I was eating TV dinners alone, my money was funding my brother's gambling and my mother's secret charity to another family. How poetic. By March, the snow in Denver had begun to melt, leaving behind grey puddles and streets, littered with salt stains. The court date was approaching, and Margaret and I were finalising the evidence. We had the bank transfers, the audit reports, and the emails, but she kept saying one thing was missing: testimony. Documents speak loudly, she'd said, but a human voice, especially one from the outside, can turn the tide. I didn't know where that voice would come from until the day I received a letter in my office mailbox. It was handwritten, shaky, addressed simply to Ms. April Martinez. Inside was a note that read, "I'm sorry I haven't spoken sooner. I think I can help you. Walter Cooper." I hadn't thought about Mr. Cooper in years. He was my parents' elderly neighbour, a kind man who used to wave from his porch whenever I visited. He must have been in his late 70s now. I called the number he left at the bottom of the note and he answered on the second ring. "April," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "I've been following what's going on. Your mother and father, they don't speak kindly about you, but I think you deserve to know a few things." We arranged to meet that Saturday at his home in Texas. I hadn't planned to return so soon, but something in his tone told me it was important. When I arrived, the sight of the old street hit me like a wave. The house still looked the same, white paint peeling, wind chimes clinking in the breeze. Mr. Cooper opened the door, leaning on his cane. "You look just like your mother did when she was young," he said with a faint smile. "Come in, dear." His living room smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old paper. On the coffee table sat a pot of tea, 2 cups and a folder. He motioned for me to sit. "I won't take much of your time," he said, "but I think you ought to hear this from someone who's seen more than he wanted to." He began by telling me about a day 5 years ago. "You probably don't remember," he said, "but I had a bad spell with my heart one summer afternoon. You were visiting, then you drove me to the ER yourself." I nodded slowly. I did remember. He had collapsed while mowing the lawn and I had rushed him to the hospital. I'd even paid for his ride home afterward. I never forgot that, he said. But what I remember even more is what happened the next week. I was back home talking with your mother. I asked her why such a good daughter like you didn't visit more often. She smiled, but not the kind of smile a mother should have. She said, "She's too busy getting rich, forgot about family." The words hit me harder than I expected. She said that. He nodded sadly. I remember it clear as day. I thought it was strange because you were the one who just helped me when none of them were around. I didn't say anything then. I figured it was just family tension. But when I saw the papers last month about the lawsuit, I couldn't stay quiet. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Cooper. Just your kindness means more than you know." He waved a hand. "Kindness is the least I can offer. But that's not all I called you here for." He leaned forward, reaching into the folder on the table. "I've got something else. Something I think your lawyer might find useful." He pulled out a small USB drive and placed it between us. "I have a security camera outside my house. I installed it after someone kept stealing my packages. It faces my driveway, but it also catches your parents' front porch. On Thanksgiving, I noticed their house was full, cars everywhere, people laughing outside. So I looked at the footage." He paused, watching my reaction. "Do you want to know what I heard?" I felt my pulse quicken. "Yes," I said quietly. He nodded, eyes heavy. "A man I didn't recognize, looked like one of your brother's friends, asked, 'Where's your sister? I thought you said she was coming.' And your brother laughed. He said, 'I didn't invite her. She makes money, but has no heart.' Then your mother's voice came in, faint but clear. 'Don't mention her name today. It's Thanksgiving. Let's have peace.'" I didn't realize I was gripping the edge of my chair until my knuckles turned white. I had imagined that conversation 100 different ways, but hearing it confirmed word for word was different. It wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate erasure. Mr. Cooper looked down. "I shouldn't have kept that footage so long, but something told me it might matter one day. I had the sound enhanced. You can hear everything. I burned it onto this drive." He slid the USB toward me. I stared at it, that tiny piece of metal holding years of denial and proof all at once. "Mr. Cooper," I said softly, "why are you doing this?" He gave a small, weary smile. "Because I've seen too many good people carry guilt that isn't theirs. I watched your parents for years. You mowed their lawn when Danny wouldn't. You sent them gifts when they forgot your birthday. I even saw the packages you mailed. They'd brag about them, then complain behind your back. You deserved better than that." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. He continued. I may be old, but I know a courtroom needs truth more than sympathy. This isn't gossip, it's evidence. Time-stamped, clear, audio, full context. I already wrote a statement for your attorney. I blinked back tears. You didn't have to go through all that trouble. Maybe not, he said, his voice softening, but someone had to remind them that the world sees what they pretend not to. People talk April. Neighbours see. You can lie to yourself, to your family, even to your God sometimes, but not to the camera next door. I almost laughed, but it came out as a shaky breath instead. I don't even know what to say, he smiled. Say thank you by winning. When I left his house, the sun was low, washing the street in gold. I walked past my parents' driveway, still half expecting to see my mother standing there with her apron on, waving like she used to when I was a teenager. But the porch was empty. The curtains were drawn. For a moment I wondered if she even knew how much the world had changed around her, how much evidence she'd left behind while trying to erase me. Back in my car I held the USB in my hand, its surface warm from his fingers. I thought about all the times I had begged for them to listen, for them to just hear me once. Now, ironically, their own words would do the talking. That night I sat across from Margaret, in her office, the USB drive between us. She plugged it in, her expression unreadable, as the footage played. The laughter, the clinking of plates, the cruel jokes, all crystal clear. When it ended, she turned to me. This, she said, isn't just testimony, it's character evidence. It shows motive, intent, and pattern. This might be what wins your case. I didn't respond. I was watching my family's voices echo from the speaker's ghosts of people I once tried to love. It hurt, but it also freed something inside me. The truth was ugly, but it was mine now, Mr. Cooper handed me a USB drive. You should have been at that table, April. But now you'll be in that courtroom. And they will listen. By the time April arrived, the air had shifted. The lawsuit had stopped being about property or money. It had become a mirror none of us could avoid. April 2025 brought with it the court's mandate for mediation, one last chance to reach resolution before the trial. My attorney, Margaret, had warned me what to expect: long silences, shallow apologies, and the kind of civility that hides venom underneath. I didn't expect truth. I expected performance. But part of me wanted to see them again, not as enemies, but as the people who had built the wound I'd spent my life trying to heal. The mediation room was a windowless conference space inside the courthouse. A long oak table divided the room, and at the centre sat a neutral mediator, a man in his 60s, calm and deliberate, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had seen too many families destroy themselves in rooms just like this. On one side sat my parents and Danny, along with their attorney. On the other sat Margaret and me. The sight of them made my stomach tighten. Mum looked smaller somehow, her hair pulled back too tightly, her face pale. Dad stared at the table, his hands folded like he was praying. Danny leaned back in his chair, jaw clenched, pretending indifference. The mediator opened with quiet authority. "This is not a trial," he said. "This is a conversation. Each of you will have a chance to speak, to say what you want, not what you think others owe you, but what you truly want." He looked at each of us in turn. "Let's start with you, Mrs. Martinez." My mother straightened her posture. "I want my daughter to understand how hard parenting is," she said, her voice brittle. "We made sacrifices she'll never know. We did the best we could." It was almost poetic the way denial can sound like pride. I didn't interrupt. The mediator nodded and turned to my father. Mr. Martinez cleared his throat. "I just want family peace," he said quietly. "That's all I've ever wanted. We're too old for this kind of bitterness." I studied him. He looked exhausted, but I wasn't sure if it was remorse or fatigue. The mediator then turned to Danny. "And you?" Danny shrugged, eyes fixed on the table. "Pass." The mediator waited, but he said nothing more. Then it was my turn. His gaze softened as he looked at me. "Miss Martinez, what do you want?" I exhaled slowly. I want to hear my brother speak. The words hung in the air. Danny's eyes flicked up for the first time meeting mine. For a second, something human passed between us. Confusion, maybe anger, but underneath it, recognition. The kind that only exists between two people who've survived the same battlefield. The mediator leaned forward. "Danny, your sister is asking you to speak. Can you tell her what you're feeling?" For a moment, he didn't move. The room waited. Then suddenly he slammed his hand on the table. "What do you want me to say?" he snapped. "That I screwed up. That I'm the loser son who stayed home while she went off and became perfect," my mother gasped. "Danny." "No," he cut her off. His voice cracked as he turned toward me. "You want truth." "April, fine. I'm fucking jealous, okay? You left. You succeeded. You became everything I'm not." The room fell silent except for his ragged breathing. He kept going, words tumbling out like floodwater breaking through a dam. "You think I didn't know what was happening? Every time you sent money, Mum reminded me. Look at your sister. She works hard. She helps us." It wasn't pride. It was a comparison. I was the disappointment she had to love because you were gone. Mum's face twisted in disbelief. "That's not true." He turned to her, shouting now. "Yes, it is. You couldn't stand the way she made you feel small. You said she forgot about family, but really, you were ashamed of me. That's why you didn't want her at Thanksgiving, because she's proof of everything we're not." My father buried his face in his hands. My mother just stared at him, eyes wide, shaking her head. "Danny, stop." But he didn't. "All those years you blamed her for leaving. You wanted her gone because it made it easier to pretend we were fine. You used her money, her kindness, and when she started pulling away, you panicked." He laughed bitterly. "You even sued her to keep the illusion alive." The mediator's pen stopped moving. The sound of the heating vent filled the silence. I wanted to speak, but for once words failed me. I had imagined confronting my family 100 different ways, cold, furious, victorious, but not like this. Not watching my brother, the boy I used to protect, finally implode under the weight of our shared history. My mother's voice trembled. "Danny, you don't understand. I was trying to hold us together." "No, you were trying to hold on to control," he interrupted. "You've been doing it my whole life. You wanted to keep her close by guilt-tripping her, and you wanted to keep me close by pretending I was a special. But all you did was break us both." The mediator raised a hand gently. "Let's pause for a moment," he said, but no one listened. I looked at Danny, really looked at him. The anger in his face wasn't directed at me. It was at himself. The slouch in his shoulders, the bitterness in his tone, it all came from shame. And in that moment, something shifted in me. I saw not the spoiled brother or the favoured son, but a man who had been trapped in a role he never asked for. I spoke quietly. "Danny," I said, "I never wanted to be perfect. I just wanted to be seen. You think I had it easy? You think success fixes what they broke?" He looked up, eyes glassy. "You don't get it. You got out. I didn't. You could have," I said. He shook his head. No, I couldn't." Someone had to stay. Someone had to make them feel like they didn't fail completely. You were their pride. I was their excuse." The words hit me harder than I expected. The mediator finally spoke, his tone gentle but firm. "It sounds like all of you have been living under expectations no one could fulfill. Parents trying to preserve dignity, children trying to earn love. But the cost has been enormous." My mother turned to him, her voice small. "We didn't mean for it to turn out like this." He nodded. "Intentions don't erase consequences, Mrs. Martinez. What matters now is whether you keep defending your pain or start understanding it." No one spoke after that. Even the air seemed to still. My father rubbed his temples. My mother wiped silent tears, and Danny sat slumped in his chair, breathing heavily. I sat across from them, realising that for all our battles, legal, emotional, financial, this was the first real conversation we'd had as a family in decades. The mediator leaned back, his voice barely above a whisper. So he said, "What do you all want to do with the truth now that it's out?" No one answered. The room went silent. The mediator leaned back. And I realized we were all prisoners of the same lie. The silence from that mediation room followed me for days. It wasn't the kind of silence that begged to be broken. It was the kind that forced you to sit with truth until you couldn't hide from it anymore. When I walked out of that courthouse, I knew something had shifted. I no longer wanted revenge, and I no longer needed victory. What I wanted now was order, clarity, structure, a line between who I was and who I refused to be again. 2 weeks later, Margaret and I met in her office to prepare what she called the closing chapter. The trial date was set for late April, but before that, the court required one last opportunity for settlement. Margaret adjusted her glasses as I reviewed the paperwork. "They're scared," she said. "After Danny's outburst, their attorney's been pushing for negotiation. I think they know the evidence you have, especially that video would ruin them publicly." I sat back quiet for a moment. "Good," I said finally. "Then let's give them a choice." She smiled slightly. "Your terms," I nodded. I'd spent nights thinking about it, not out of anger, but out of justice. The way you draft something when you finally understand that fairness isn't about punishment, it's about boundaries. "We'll give them 2 options," I said. "Settlement or trial?" Margaret gestured for me to continue. "Option 1. Settlement, 4 conditions." I read from the paper I had written in my own hand. First, they must post a public Facebook apology, both of them acknowledging that I supported them financially for a total of $136,000 as over the past 2.5 years. The post has to stay up permanently. No excuses, no half-truths. Margaret's eyes lifted, impressed. "That's bold." Second, I continued, Danny has to enroll in Gamblers Anonymous and get a full-time job within 3 months. If he doesn't, the agreement voids. Margaret nodded approvingly. "You're not punishing him, you're giving him a path." "That's the point," I said. "This isn't revenge, it's accountability." Third, I went on, I'll transfer 60% of the house ownership back to my parents. They can keep their home, but they'll know it's because I allowed it, not because they took it. Margaret leaned back. And the fourth, they repay $50,000 over 5 years. No interest, just a gesture that says they understand money was never the problem. It was the respect behind it. Margaret exhaled. "And if they refuse, then we go to trial," I said. "If I win, they pay everything, $136,000 interest and all legal fees. If they win, I'll continue the mortgage payments for 3 more years, or agree to let the bank sell the house at auction. No middle ground." She studied me for a long moment. "You know, most people in your position would want to destroy them." I met her gaze. "Destruction's easy. Discipline takes more strength." When the day came, we gathered once again in the mediation room, the same one where Danny's confession had cracked the air open. This time, the mood was quieter, cautious. Everyone knew there would be no shouting today, only decisions. The mediator entered, carrying a folder thick with notes. "We're here to discuss possible resolution," he said evenly. "Ms. Martinez, would you like to begin?" Margaret nodded toward me and I spoke. My voice was calm, steady, deliberate. "I have considered what's been said and what's been done. I don't want to keep fighting, but I also won't pretend nothing happened. So here's what I'm offering." I read through the 4 terms one by one. My parents didn't interrupt. My mother's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. My father stared at the papers as though the words might rearrange themselves if he waited long enough. Danny kept his eyes fixed on the wall. When I finished, the mediator asked, and the alternative Margaret answered for me. "If the settlement isn't accepted, we proceed to trial. You're all aware of the potential damages." their attorney whispered something to my father, who leaned toward my mother. She shook her head slightly, whispering back. Danny muttered something under his breath, but no one caught it. The room filled with the low buzz of whispered fear, the kind that hums between people who realize the truth is no longer something they can hide from. Finally, my mother spoke. "You want us to apologize on Facebook?" "Yes," I said simply, "because that's where it started. That's where you posted Thanksgiving pictures without me. You made the lie public. You can make the truth public too." Her lips trembled. "Do you know what that would do to our reputation?" "Maybe it will show people that honesty isn't humiliation," I said quietly. "Maybe it'll help someone else not repeat what we did here." My father cleared his throat. "And the $50,000, I don't care if you pay it all at once or $20 a month," I said. "It's not about the money. It's about acknowledgement." Danny finally spoke, his voice low. "And me. You get a second chance," I said. "But only if you take it seriously. No more excuses, no more hiding behind me." He looked down, nodding slowly. The mediator gave them time to discuss. For nearly 30 minutes they whispered among themselves while I sat still staring at the grain of the wooden table. Every second stretched, the way time does when you've been waiting your whole life for someone to choose decency over pride. Finally, their attorney cleared his throat. "My clients are willing to accept the settlement." I felt something in my chest loosen. It wasn't triumph, it was relief. My mother's voice broke the silence. "We just want this to end." I looked at her. "So do I." The mediator summarized the terms again for the record. When it came time to sign, I noticed my mother's hand trembling as she took the pen. My father guided hers for a moment, as if afraid she might stop halfway. Danny signed last. When the papers were collected, the mediator smiled faintly. Then it settled. For a while, no one moved. The weight in the room felt different. Now, not anger, not accusation, but the heaviness that follows surrender. My parents sat across from me, eyes down, until finally, my mother looked up. Her gaze lingered on mine, searching for something. Forgiveness, maybe. Understanding. Then she turned to my father, who looked at Danny. And in that quiet chain of glances, I saw something I had never seen before. Not guilt, not pity, but recognition. Mum looked at Dad. Dad looked at Danny. And for the first time in my life, they looked at me like I was someone who mattered. For weeks after that day, I kept replaying that moment in my mind. The way my father's eyes softened, how my mother's shoulders dropped like she'd been carrying a weight for years. It didn't erase the past, but it was the first moment that didn't feel one-sided. There was finally recognition, not just for what I'd given, but for who I was. By May, the legal paperwork had been finalised and the settlement terms were officially recorded. The apology post was due that weekend. Margaret had told me not to expect much. "People like your parents," she said gently, "they'll struggle to show contrition in public. But the fact they're willing to do it at all, that's progress." The morning of May the 3rd, I woke up earlier than usual. It was a Saturday, the kind that would have been perfect for pancakes and quiet coffee. Instead, I sat at my desk, logged into Facebook, and refreshed my mother's page. The post appeared at 8:12 a.m. "We want to publicly thank our daughter April Martinez for supporting us financially with $136,000 over 2 years. We failed to appreciate her sacrifices and even excluded her from family events, including Thanksgiving. We are deeply sorry for our actions and are working to rebuild trust as a family." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words looked too plain to hold so much history. I read them 3 times, each slower than the last. My mother had written, "We not I," which told me my father had helped. The phrasing wasn't perfect, it was formal, almost rehearsed, but it was real. For the first time in my life, they admitted it publicly. I was not the ungrateful one. I had been the one giving. Within minutes, the comments began to flood in. Aunt Linda was first. "I had no idea you were helping so much, April. You're such a good daughter." Then came Cousin Maria. "You didn't invite her to Thanksgiving. That's awful." Someone else from church wrote, "This took courage to post. Wishing your family healing." I scrolled through dozens of reactions: shock, sympathy, confusion. People who'd once believed my parents' version of events were now piecing together the truth. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. It was something quieter, something closer to peace. By noon, the post had over 200 reactions. Most were supportive, a few awkward. One comment simply said, "We all make mistakes, but owning them is rare." That one stayed with me. My parents didn't respond to anyone. They just left the post there, pinned to the top of their page like a confession framed in glass. Then around 2 o'clock, a new post appeared, this time from Danny. His profile picture, a blurry selfie with a baseball cap, hadn't changed in years. The post was long. I had to click see more to finish reading it. I am the brother who took advantage of my sister's kindness. I gambled away money meant for our family. I belittled her success because I was ashamed of my own failure. I said things no brother should ever say. April. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm going to earn it. I've joined Gamblers Anonymous, started a part-time job, and I'm trying to be someone our parents don't have to lie about anymore. I stared at the screen. For a long time, I didn't move. Danny had never said anything like that, not to me, not to anyone, not even during mediation when he'd exploded in anger. This was different. This was ownership. The comments came fast again. Old friends, co-workers, neighbours. "Proud of you for saying this, Danny. That takes guts. You're lucky to have a sister like April." Others weren't so kind. "Took you long enough." Actions speak louder than words. But the mix of reactions didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth had finally left our house. It wasn't trapped behind closed doors anymore. By evening, my phone started lighting up. Texts from co-workers who'd seen the posts, some from extended relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. "April, we had no idea. You're stronger than all of them combined." One from my aunt simply said, "Now everyone knows who you really are." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I made tea, sat by my apartment window, and watched the city fade into evening. It's strange how vindication doesn't look the way you imagine. I thought it would feel like winning, like standing on some invisible podium finally seen. But it felt softer, smaller, more human. Maybe because when truth finally arrives, it doesn't shout. It just sits quietly, like it was always supposed to be there. That night, I went back to Facebook one more time. My mother's post now had over 400 likes, and Danny's was being shared by people from his old college. Some of his friends even commented, "We all mess up, man. Good on you for owning it." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who used to mock me for being uptight were now applauding honesty. Then, I saw one comment that made me stop scrolling. It was from an older woman I didn't know. She wrote, "April, I hope you know your story will help other daughters who feel unseen. Thank you for standing your ground." For the first time in months, I felt something rise in my chest that wasn't bitterness or exhaustion. It was gratitude. Not for what happened, but for what I'd survived. I clicked over to Danny's post again. His words stared back at me raw and unpolished. I imagined him sitting somewhere sweating over each sentence, rewriting them until they finally sounded true. Maybe this was his first honest act in years. I read Danny's post 3 times. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I clicked like. The last sentence of the previous part was, I read Danny's post 3 times. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I clicked like. In the days that followed, everything began to change. Not instantly, not dramatically, but in small, quiet ways that said the balance had shifted for good. The world around my family no longer saw them through the same lens. For years, they had been the charming, close-knit couple who'd raised a successful daughter and a sweet, struggling son. Now they were the parents who had written a public confession. And no matter how well-meaning that post had been, the internet has a long memory. By early June, relatives who once adored my mother stopped calling. Aunt Linda's comments turned from sympathetic to distant. My parents' church friends avoided eye contact during Sunday service. Mum told me later that the pastor's wife had said, "It's brave what you did, but people talk." That was the polite way of saying their reputation had cracked. I didn't gloat, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting less than their silence used to. Dad, ever the peacemaker, tried to keep up appearances. He continued posting family recipes, pictures of their garden, pretending things were normal. But the comments were gone. Even Danny's friends stopped coming by. He'd kept his word, though, joined Gamblers Anonymous, taken a part-time job at an auto shop. It was small progress, but for him, it was monumental. I could see him trying. I didn't reach out yet. I needed time to believe the change was real. Then there was Mum. The woman who'd once lived for family appearances was now living in quiet accountability. The weight of the apology seemed to press down on her shoulders. During one of our brief phone calls, she said, "People look at me differently now." I almost said, "Now you know how it felt," but I bit my tongue. Growth requires silence too. By late June, I started hearing from relatives again, not about me, but about her. "Your mum isn't herself," one cousin said. "She doesn't come to gatherings. She's softer." It wasn't pity in their voices. It was curiosity, like they couldn't reconcile the woman they used to know with the one learning to live without a pedestal. Then one Thursday evening she called unexpectedly. Her voice was unsteady, like she'd been crying, but didn't want me to hear it. "April," she began, "I went to a meeting today." "What kind of meeting?" I asked, bracing for bad news. "It's called Parents Who Hurt Their Kids Without Knowing." There was a long pause. "It's a support group. I didn't think it was for people like me, but..." Her voice broke. "I think maybe it is." I didn't know what to say. My mother, who once defended every decision as righteous, was now sitting in a circle somewhere admitting she'd done harm. She told me about the stories she'd heard, parents who'd cut off children over career choices, daughters who'd gone years without hearing, "I'm proud of you." She said one woman had shared how her son stopped talking to her after being excluded from a family holiday. She said she didn't even remember why Mum whispered, and I thought, that's me. For the first time, I could hear empathy in her voice instead of guilt. Not the kind of guilt that wants to erase the past, but the kind that wants to understand it. She said the facilitator had asked each parent to finish the sentence, "I hurt my child when..." And when it was her turn, she said, "I hurt my daughter when I made her feel replaceable." Then she'd cried in front of strangers. When she finished telling me, the line went quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in her kitchen, the sound I'd grown up hearing in every late-night conversation that never reached honesty. "I think..." She started again, her voice trembling. "I think I've been a bad mother." There it was, the sentence I'd wanted to hear for most of my adult life. But it didn't land the way I expected. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but all I felt was tired. Because the truth didn't fix anything. It just made room for a new kind of ache. I took a deep breath. "Mum," I said carefully, "you can't change what happened." "I know," she whispered, "but I want to understand it. I want to be better before it's too late." Something in her voice, soft, uncertain, almost childlike, made me pause. This wasn't manipulation or guilt. It was something rarer, humility. I didn't rush to forgive her. I didn't tell her it was okay. I just listened. She talked about how the support group planned weekly exercises like writing letters to their children or reenacting apologies. She said she wasn't sure she could do it, but she was going back next week anyway. When she asked if I believed she could change, I told her I believe people can choose to. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't rejection either. After we hung up, I sat in silence. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who would have given anything to hear her mother admit she was wrong. That girl would have cried tears of relief. But the woman I'd become just stared out the window, realizing that forgiveness wasn't a door you opened once. It was a hallway you walked down slowly, sometimes alone. In the weeks that followed, Mum kept attending those meetings. She didn't call as often, and when she did, she didn't ask for updates about money or bills. Instead, she'd say things like, "I heard something today that reminded me of you." Once she even shared a quote from her group acknowledgement is the seed of change. It wasn't a perfect redemption arc, and maybe it never would be, but it was real. For the first time, my mother wasn't asking for money. She was asking for a chance. I didn't know if I could give it. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected. It echoed in my head whenever I checked my phone and saw no new messages from home. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space room for everyone to figure out who they were, without leaning on or blaming someone else. That included Danny. After everything that had happened, the lawsuit, the apology post the unravelling of our family's myths, I'd assumed he would disappear into avoidance. But August arrived with a surprise. One Saturday morning, I woke to a text from him. It had a photo attached to paper paycheck, $1.40 printed neatly across the top. Beneath it, he'd written, "This month, I'm giving Mum $200. First money I ever earned myself." Feels weird. I stared at it for a long time. The numbers looked small compared to the thousands I'd once sent home every month, but the meaning behind them was enormous. For the first time in his life, Danny wasn't taking from someone. He was giving back, even in a small way. I didn't reply immediately. I wanted to find the right words, ones that neither celebrated too loudly nor sounded patronising. Eventually, I just typed, "That's a good start, Danny. I'm proud of you." He didn't respond, but later that night he sent a thumbs up. It was simple, but it said more than any phone call could. Over the next few weeks, I began to see changes I hadn't thought possible. Mum texted occasional updates, not the manipulative kind, but quiet, factual ones. Danny got promoted to full-time hours. He's been home every night this week. He still goes to those meetings. She didn't use the words Gamblers Anonymous, but I knew that's what she meant. I pictured him sitting in some church basement under fluorescent lights, listening, fidgeting, trying to hold his restlessness in check. Then, one evening, as I was finishing work, my phone buzzed again. Danny had sent a photo of his hands greasy blistered, holding a wrench. "I fixed the transmission today," he wrote. "Boss said I'm fast for a newbie." I smiled without meaning to. This was the same brother who once couldn't fix a curtain rod without swearing. Now he was fixing engines. It felt symbolic somehow, like he was learning to repair more than cars. But change is a fragile thing. 2 weeks later, at nearly midnight, my phone rang. It was a short call, only 40 seconds. Danny's voice was low, shaky. "I messed up," he said. My stomach sank before he even explained. "I gambled again," he confessed. "Online. Stupid poker app. Lost about 400. There was silence. Then, before I could say anything, he added, "But I didn't borrow. I called my sponsor. I'm working extra night shifts to pay it back. I just wanted you to hear it from me, not Mum." For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. The old Danny would have hidden it, made excuses, maybe even begged for help. This version was different, ashamed but accountable. "Okay," I said quietly. "What matters now is what you do next." "I know," he whispered. "I'm not quitting the meetings. I'm not running. I needed to tell someone who saw me at my worst." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time thinking about how different this moment felt from every argument we'd ever had. I wasn't angry. I wasn't disappointed. I was humanly sad but hopeful. Relapse didn't erase progress. It just reminded me that growth isn't measured by perfection, but persistence. Mum called the next morning. "Did he tell you?" she asked, her voice calm. "Yes," I said. "He did," she sighed. He came home from the shop looking like the world had collapsed. I thought he was going to ask for money again, but instead he said, "Don't worry, I'll fix it." Then he grabbed his jacket and went back to work. That image stayed with me all day. For years, my family's pattern had been predictable. Danny created chaos. I cleaned it up, Mum justified it, and Dad stayed silent. Now, for the first time, Danny was sweeping his own mess. A week later, he called again, this time sounding steadier. "Debt's gone," he said. "Sponsor says I handled it right." Then, after a pause, "You know what's weird? Paying for your own mistake feels better than avoiding it." I laughed softly. "That's because it's real," I told him. "And real things hurt a little." He didn't say anything for a while. Then, in a voice quieter than I'd ever heard from him, he said, "I used to think you were lucky, April. That life just worked out for you. But now, I see it, you just kept doing the hard stuff no one else wanted to do." I didn't know what to say. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was something better recognition. I could feel my throat tighten, and I simply said, "Thanks for saying that." In late August, he sent me another text. 6 months since I last borrowed a dime, it read. Still counting. Attached was a photo of a calendar with X marks across every day. Beneath it, a sticky note read, "Don't go backward for anyone." That small note hit me harder than any grand gesture. It reminded me that redemption isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest enough to start over again and again until the truth feels stronger than the shame. When I visited home briefly that month, I saw him at the auto shop during his lunch break. He was thinner, tanner, his hands rough but steady. "You actually came," he said with a half grin. "I wanted to see for myself," I replied. He handed me a soda from the vending machine. "It's not glamorous," he said, glancing at the grease stains on his uniform, "but it's mine." I nodded. "That's worth more than you think." We didn't talk about the lawsuit or Thanksgiving or the years we'd lost. We just sat in the shade of the garage, listening to the hum of engines and the clatter of tools. For once, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was understanding. That night, as I drove back to Denver, I thought about all the times I'd wished for revenge, for justice, for my family to feel what I felt. And now, watching them stumble and rebuild, I realized I didn't need them to hurt. I just needed them to grow. Change isn't a straight line. It's a staircase. And sometimes you trip. The question is, do you get back up? 6 months later, I learned that getting back up didn't just apply to Danny. It applied to all of us. Life had started to take on a quieter rhythm. No lawsuits, no public drama, no late-night phone calls filled with anger or guilt. Just distance, calm, and a kind of watchful peace. I still lived in Denver, working long hours, taking walks in the evenings when the city lights began to glow against the autumn sky. I hadn't been home since the mediation. We'd exchanged polite texts, holiday greetings, birthday wishes, the occasional update about Danny's job, but nothing too personal. I told myself that was enough. Some relationships needed space to breathe before they could live again. Then, one Friday morning in early September, I came home to find a thick envelope sitting against my apartment door. My name was written across it in my father's careful handwriting, block letters uneven but firm. My heart stuttered. I hadn't seen that handwriting since the day he'd signed the settlement papers. I carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen table. For a while, I just looked at it, unsure whether I wanted to open it. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than paper. When I finally tore it open, 2 things fell out: a check and a folded piece of lined notebook paper. The check was for $8, the first of 60 payments, just as we had agreed. The amount wasn't large, but it was exact, deliberate. I could almost imagine him calculating it down to the cent and determined not to get it wrong. Beneath the check was the letter. April, it began. I had to sell my old truck to gather this month's money, but I feel proud. For the first time in my life, I feel worthy of being your father. I love you. I'm sorry it took 33 years to say this. I read it twice before I let myself react. My father was a man of few words. Most of my childhood memories of him were quiet, sitting at the kitchen table after long work days, fixing things around the house, nodding silently when he approved of something but never saying it out loud. To see those words written to see I love you in his handwriting was something I didn't realise I'd been waiting for all my life. I imagined him sitting at that same kitchen table, pen shaking slightly as he wrote, maybe rewriting that last line a few times before deciding it was finally right. I thought about his truck, the faded blue Ford that had carried him to every job, every errand. He'd had that truck since I was a teenager. Selling it wasn't just about money, it was about surrendering a piece of pride. And in return, he found something greater. As I folded the letter back into the envelope, something else slipped out a photograph. At first, I thought it was an old one, maybe from when we were kids. But then I noticed the date printed in the corner, November 2024. It was new. The picture showed my parents' dining table set for Thanksgiving. The same wooden table I'd grown up around, polished to a soft shine. There was turkey, cranberry sauce, even the pumpkin pie Mum always made from scratch. But what stopped me wasn't what was there, it was what wasn't. There was an empty seat at the far end where I used to sit. In front of it, a small folded name card read, April's seat, reserved. I didn't realise I was crying until the photo blurred in my hands. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was something gentler, like relief tangled with grief. For years I'd wanted them to see me, not as the provider, not as the problem, but simply as part of them. And there it was, a seat saved in my absence, an acknowledgement of the space I had always occupied, even when they pretended I didn't. I sat at my own kitchen table for a long time, the check lying between us like a quiet truce. I could have deposited it that day, but I didn't. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about meaning. Every cent of that check was a word they'd never said, every payment a small act of accountability. That weekend, I called my father. He answered on the second ring. His voice was steady but cautious, the way someone sounds when they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. I got your letter, I said. He exhaled a sound that was half relief, half fear. I didn't know if you'd read it. I did. Did you? He hesitated. Did it make you angry? No, I said quietly. It made me proud. There was a pause. Then I heard him sniffle a sound I hadn't heard since I was a child. I didn't want you to think I was trying to buy forgiveness, he said. This isn't about money. It's about doing something right, even if it's late. I know, Dad. I sold the truck last month. Danny told me not to said he'd cover me, but I told him this one was mine. I needed to do it myself. His voice broke a little on that word myself, and I realised that this was his version of healing. Not grand speeches, not tears, but doing the hard, humbling thing quietly. When we hung up, I looked at the photo again. That empty chair, the neat handwriting on the name card. I could almost see my mother placing it there, maybe hesitating before writing my name, maybe hoping that one day I'd see it. For years, I'd wondered what real change looked like. Not the dramatic kind that movies show, but the kind that lasts, the kind built from small, consistent acts of courage. That check, that letter, that photo, those were their acts. That night, I found an old frame in my closet, the kind I'd once planned to use for a diploma or certificate. Instead, I placed the photo inside. It wasn't about nostalgia, it was about acknowledgement. Every family has ghosts, and that picture reminded me that sometimes they can still find a seat at the table. I slid the check into my desk drawer between folders and unopened mail. It could wait. The money didn't matter nearly as much as the gesture. But the photo, I hung it on the wall near my desk, where the light from the window could touch it each morning. Every time I looked at it, I felt something soften inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of it. A kind of quiet understanding that some love comes late, but it still counts. I put the check in my drawer, but I framed the photo. 2 months passed after that, and for the first time in a long time, I began to believe that maybe peace wasn't temporary. The payments came on time, small but steady, and each envelope carried a new kind of warmth. Sometimes there was a note from my mother, sometimes a brief line from my father. Truck sold debts, cleared one read. Another said, Your brother worked overtime this week. They weren't just paying money back, they were paying attention. I kept the envelopes in a shoebox under my bed, each one proof that our family could do something right. By November, the air in Denver turned crisp. I'd planned to visit Texas for the first time in nearly 2 years, just a short weekend before Thanksgiving. Nothing dramatic, no family dinner, just a quiet check-in. I told myself I was ready. Then, 3 days before my flight, I got an email from the bank. The subject line was clinical, almost cold. Notice of returned payment. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I logged into my account and saw the transaction marked in red. The $833 check from my parents had bounced. The memo line read November payment. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, my pulse hammering in my ears. After everything we'd rebuilt, after all their promises, how could this happen again? I waited a few hours before calling the bank to confirm. The woman on the phone was polite, detached. The account associated with the check did not have sufficient funds, she said. I asked if it could be reprocessed. She said no unless the payer deposited new funds. It was final. I didn't call my parents immediately. I didn't want to explode or accuse them of lying. I wanted to believe there was a reason, a delay, a banking error, anything but betrayal. But by evening, my patience cracked. I dialed my mother's number. She didn't pick up. I tried again. Voicemail. Then I called Danny. This time he answered, voice slurred with exhaustion. April, he said. What happened to the payment, I asked. The check bounced. There was a pause long enough for me to know the truth before he said it. I messed up, he muttered. God, I thought I could win it back. It was like a lightning strike in my chest. Danny, what did you do? I gambled, he said, voice breaking. It was just supposed to be a small thing. 2,000. I thought I'd double it and put it back before Mum noticed. My throat went dry. You took it from the family account, didn't you? The one for the payments. He didn't answer, which told me everything. Danny, do you realise what you've done? I said, trying to stay calm. You didn't just take money. You broke the one thing we had left, trust. I know, he said softly. I'm sorry. Please don't tell Dad yet. I'll fix it. But I didn't have to. The next morning, my father called me first. His number flashed on my screen at 7:02 a.m. I almost didn't answer. I couldn't face another round of excuses, but something in me said to pick up. April, he said immediately, his voice thick and trembling. I'm so sorry. I closed my eyes. So you know? Yes, he said. I found out last night. The money's gone. Danny admitted everything. I waited for the familiar script. Defend him, excuse him, promise to talk to him. But my father's next words stopped me cold. He was wrong, he said quietly. And your mother and I will make it right. I didn't speak. I'm selling the truck, he continued. I already listed it this morning. I'll pay the full amount myself before the end of the week. I blinked, confused. Dad, you already sold your old truck months ago. He let out a short, tired laugh. I bought another one in August. Nothing fancy, just something to get to work. But it doesn't matter. I can take the bus. What matters is keeping our word to you. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. The man who had spent most of my life defending my brother, minimizing my pain, was now standing firmly beside me. You don't have to do that, I said quietly. You don't owe me more than what you already gave. Yes, I do, he said, voice cracking. Because I taught you the wrong lessons. I taught you that silence was strength, that loyalty meant staying, even when it hurt. I let your brother believe that love meant being rescued, and I let you believe that being the strong one meant being alone. I'm done teaching the wrong lessons. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to steady myself. Dad, he took a shaky breath. I want you to know something. When I found out what Danny did, your mother wanted to call you before I did. But I told her no. I told her this was my responsibility. Because this time, you shouldn't be the one cleaning up the mess. We should. It was as if the ground shifted beneath me. For 33 years, I'd waited for him to say those words to stand between me and the storm instead of watching from the porch. And now, here it was, quiet and late, but real. Danny's already back in meetings, he added. He called his sponsor. He's sick about it, April. He didn't run this time. He told me he'd face it. But that doesn't erase what he did. I sat down, gripping the phone tighter. I don't want to sue, I whispered. I just needed to know the truth. You won't have to, he said. The new check will clear. I promise you. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, like a bridge being built plank by plank between two people who had finally stopped pretending they didn't need one. Before we hung up, he said something I never thought I'd hear. April, he murmured, I'm proud of the woman you are, and I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time staring at the framed photo on my wall, the Thanksgiving table, the empty chair with my name on it. For years, I'd wished for that chair to be filled. But maybe it was never about sitting there. Maybe it was about knowing it existed, that I had a place even when no one was ready to admit it. That week, a new envelope arrived. Inside was a cashier's check for 850 unheard, paid in full. No note this time, just a slip of paper that said, paid by Dad. I didn't cry. I just placed it gently in the shoebox with the others. My father's voice had cracked on the phone that morning, and heard something I'd waited 33 years to hear him choosing me. After that call, something inside me shifted. It wasn't joy exactly, it was quieter than that, like a muscle unclenching after years of strain. For weeks, I carried the sound of his voice in my head, replaying it at odd moments in the car in the grocery store during long evenings alone. It had taken him 33 years to choose me, but now that he finally had, I didn't know what to do with the emptiness that followed. Because once the storm calms, you start hearing everything you've ignored. The loneliness, the exhaustion, the cracks beneath your own strength. By October, I realised that while my family was rebuilding, I hadn't even started. Danny had his meetings, my parents had each other, and I had silence, the kind that doesn't comfort, only echoes. One evening, while sorting through bills and unopened envelopes, I came across a pamphlet I'd picked up months ago but never read, Finding Balance Individual Therapy with Dr. Priya Patel. I stared at the simple black and white text until the words blurred. For the first time in years, I made an appointment for myself instead of someone else. Dr. Patel's office was on the 12th floor of a modest brick building downtown. The waiting room smelled faintly of jasmine tea and old paper. On my first visit, I sat stiffly on the couch, unsure how to start. She was calm and kind-eyed, her tone gentle but firm. What brought you here, April? She asked. I hesitated. My family, I said finally. We've been through a lot, she nodded. And how have you been through it? I almost laughed. I guess I just handled it. Her expression didn't change. That sounds lonely. I looked down at my hands. It was. Over the next few sessions, she didn't ask me about my parents' actions, as much as she asked about my reactions, what it felt like to give, to forgive, to hold everything together. I told her about the $850 a week, about the Thanksgiving that broke me, about the lawsuit that nearly destroyed what was left of our family. Each time I spoke, she listened without judgment, sometimes jotting a note, sometimes just letting the silence breathe between us. Then one afternoon in late October, she leaned forward slightly and asked, "Why do you think you gave so much?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My throat tightened. Then before I could stop it, the words spilled out. Because if I didn't, who would love me? I hadn't planned to cry, but I did. Quietly, without warning, like the truth had been waiting behind my ribs for years. Dr. Patel didn't interrupt. She handed me a tissue and waited until I could breathe again. When I finally looked up, she said softly, "You confused generosity with worthiness. You thought if you paid enough, you'd finally be enough." Her words were surgical, precise, painful, and true. I sat there in silence, the tissue damp in my hand, feeling the weight of it settle. For years I'd believed that love was transactional, that if I gave enough money, time, or forgiveness, I could buy my way into being wanted. But no matter how much I gave, the balance never changed. Was I wrong to help them? I asked quietly. She shook her head no. You were wrong to disappear while doing it. That sentence struck something deep. I thought about all the times I'd sent money but skipped meals the weekends I'd cancelled plans to take care of their problems, the birthdays I'd spent alone because they needed me. I thought I was being selfless. But maybe I'd been erasing myself little by little, thinking that absence was the price of love. Dr. Patel leaned back in her chair. You didn't just give them money, April. You gave them your presence, your peace, your identity. And when they took advantage of that, you didn't stop. You doubled down, hoping that maybe this time it would be enough. I wiped my eyes, half embarrassed, half relieved. So what do I do now? Now, she said, you start giving to yourself with the same devotion you gave to everyone else. It sounded simple, almost naive. But that night, as I lay in bed, those words echoed in my head, give to yourself. I realised I didn't know how. My whole adult life had been built around other people's needs. The idea of prioritising my own felt selfish, even shameful. But I wanted to learn. The next morning I started small. I turned off my work phone after 6. I made breakfast on a Sunday and didn't feel guilty for doing nothing. I even bought a small notebook, one I called Letters I'll Never Send. In it, I started writing to my younger self, the girl who once thought love had to be earned. One entry began simply, Dear 16-year-old me, you are already enough. You always were. I wrote for an hour without stopping. I told her she didn't have to fix everyone to deserve being seen. I told her that being strong didn't mean being silent. I told her that kindness was beautiful, but only if it included herself. And as I wrote, I felt something loosen, a quiet forgiveness not for my parents, but for the girl who had spent her life waiting to be chosen. During my next session, I told Dr. Patel about the letter. She smiled. That's good work, she said. When you talk to your younger self, you stop needing other people to validate your pain. You start becoming your own witness. It took me a while to understand that. Healing. I learned isn't about rewriting the past, it's about releasing your grip on it. It's about realising that even if they never change again, even if the apology comes late or imperfect, your worth was never in their hands to begin with. That night, I reread my letter and tucked it inside the frame, holding the Thanksgiving photo. 2 symbols of 2 kinds of healing, one from them, one from me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a rescuer, a victim, or even a survivor. I just felt human. That night, I finally understood I wasn't just healing from what they did. I was healing from what I did to myself. After that night, my life didn't suddenly become peaceful. Healing isn't a switch you flip, it's a quiet routine you practice until one day it feels natural. There were still mornings when I woke up expecting chaos, expecting another crisis to fix, another person to rescue. But instead, all I heard was silence. For the first time, silence didn't mean abandonment, it meant calm. I learned to fill it with small things, watering plants before work, cooking breakfast, instead of grabbing coffee, sitting on my balcony for 10 minutes before opening emails. Little habits, but each one said the same thing, I'm here now. For me. Months passed and life began to take on a different rhythm. Therapy with Dr. Patel continued. She said something once that stayed with me. Peace feels boring to people who grew up surviving. It was true. For so long, I measured love by intensity, by how much it hurt, how much it cost me, how hard I worked to earn it. Learning to live without drama felt strange, almost suspicious, like waiting for a wave that never came. Work became my anchor. Numbers were simple. They didn't lie. They didn't forget to invite you to dinner. I had been with the company for nearly 9 years, steadily climbing from junior accountant to director of finance. My co-workers respected me, though few really knew me. I was efficient, composed, the person people turned to when things went wrong. Ask April, she'll fix it, they'd say. And I always did. But this time I wasn't fixing to be loved. I was doing it because I was good at it. There's a quiet power in competence, especially when you've spent your life being underestimated. In March 2026, 11 months after the mediation that changed everything, my boss called me into the executive conference room. It was a Friday afternoon, and I assumed it was about end-of-quarter reports. When I walked in, the CEO and the head of HR were already there. They stood when I entered, which immediately made me nervous. April, the CEO said with a smile, closed at the door. For a moment I froze. My mind jumped to every worst-case scenario had I missed a deadline. Did a report go wrong? But then she said the words that made my knees go weak. We're promoting you to Chief Financial Officer. I blinked. I thought I'd misheard her. I'm sorry, what? She laughed softly. You earned this. You've been running the department in everything but title for over a year. You've stabilised our books, managed the audits flawlessly, and shown leadership that's rare. I tried to form words, but nothing came out. The CFO, me. April Martinez, the invisible daughter, the backup plan, the financial safety net for everyone else. Suddenly, I was the one being recognised not for what I gave away, but for what I built. That evening, the company threw a small celebration in the office lounge. There were a few bottles of champagne paper cups and a cake someone had picked up from a nearby bakery. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. My co-workers clapped, my boss gave a short toast, and then it was my turn to speak. I looked around the room, faces of people who had only ever known the version of me who worked late and smiled through exhaustion. I took a deep breath. I used to think being a good daughter meant giving everything I said. Now I know it means knowing when to stop. For a second, the room was silent. Then, one by one, people began to clap. It wasn't the loud, rowdy applause of obligation. It was quiet and steady, the kind that feels like understanding. Some smiled knowingly, others just nodded. It was the first time I'd spoken about my personal life in a way that wasn't masked as humour or brushed aside. After the speeches ended, I slipped away to the balcony, overlooking downtown Denver. The night air was crisp. The city lights stretched out below me like veins of gold. I leaned on the railing, breathing it in. Success, when it's yours, doesn't feel like victory. It feels like peace. That's when I heard a voice behind me. You disappeared before we could cut the cake. I turned. It was David, senior accountant, quiet, observant, the kind of man who listens more than he talks. I smiled. I figured I'd let the sugar rush belong to everyone else. He chuckled. You really don't like being the centre of attention, do you? Not much practice, I admitted. He held out a glass of champagne. Then, let's toast out here, to balance sheets and new beginnings. I clinked my glass against his, to both. We talked for a while about work, about life, about nothing in particular. He mentioned he was divorced, that he had an 11-year-old daughter who loved baking. I told him I was still learning how to rest. There was no flirting, no pretense, just two people having an honest conversation without performance. When the gathering ended, he asked, Some of us are heading to Bella's after this. Italian place around the corner. You should come. My instinct was to say no. I'd always been the person who went straight home after work, too tired, too private, too used to solitude. But something in his tone felt genuine. Not like an invitation, but like an inclusion. All right, I said finally. One drink. Bella's was cosy red brick walls, soft light, the faint scent of garlic and basil. 6 of us went, but somehow David and I ended up across from each other. He asked questions that weren't small talk. Do you actually like your job? He asked at one point. I thought about it. Yes, but I used to like it for the wrong reasons. It made me feel safe. Like if I kept performing, I couldn't be abandoned. He nodded slowly. And now I just like the numbers, I said with a small smile. They're honest. He smiled back. That's a good reason. At some point, the conversation shifted to books, travel, things we miss doing. I mentioned how I once dreamed of visiting Maine, renting a cabin by the ocean just to see what quiet really sounded like. He said, maybe someday you should go. Not to escape, but to arrive. When the check came, everyone argued over it, and David finally said, April's the CFO now, she can approve the expense. The table laughed, and for once I laughed with them. Not politely, not out of habit, but genuinely. As we left the restaurant, he walked beside me. You know, he said people chase promotions like they're tickets to happiness. But I think the real reward is being able to go home proud of how you got there. I looked up at the night sky. I think so too. That night, driving home through quiet streets, I realised it was the first time I'd celebrated something without guilt. I didn't owe anyone for it. It wasn't borrowed pride or second-hand success. It was mine. The next few weeks were busy. The CFO title came with more pressure, more responsibility, but I felt ready. I delegated tasks instead of drowning in them. I scheduled boundaries like appointments, no work calls after 8, no checking emails, and Sundays. I even took a long weekend trip to Estes Park, hiked alone, and watched the sunrise from the lake. One evening, while organising files, I found an old photo of my family Thanksgiving 2014. In it, I was half cut from the frame standing at the edge of the table. For a long moment, I stared at that picture, remembering how invisible I'd felt. Then, I tucked it away and replaced it with a new one, my co-workers and me laughing at the office party. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. David and I started meeting for coffee once or twice a week. He never asked personal questions I wasn't ready to answer. Sometimes we talked about work, sometimes we sat in silence, both content. It wasn't romance, it was connection. A reminder that not all relationships require sacrifice. In therapy, Dr. Patel asked, how does success feel now? Different, I said. It doesn't feel like running anymore. It feels like standing still and not being scared of it. She smiled. Then you're finally living, not surviving. I thought about that as I left her office, the city humming around me. For years, I'd built my worth on what I could fix, what I could give, who I could save. But this was new. This was balance. A few weeks later, during a leadership retreat, one of the board members said to me, April, you have this rare calmness about you. It makes people trust you. I smiled, thinking of how long it took to earn that calm. How it wasn't born from luck, but from learning to let go. Driving home that night, I realised something simple but profound. My life was finally mine. Not shaped by guilt, not tethered by obligation, not defined by family history or fear. Just mine. For the first time in my life, I had something that was mine. A success they didn't fund. A celebration they didn't ruin. A future they didn't control. A year passed after that moment, and it was the kind of year that didn't feel extraordinary, just steady, quiet, and full of things that finally made sense. My days were simple, now a morning coffee on the porch work that challenged me, but didn't consume me, dinners that didn't involve frozen meals eaten in silence. The promotion had changed my title, but not my heart. What truly changed was what I allowed to fill my life. I stopped chasing approval and started creating peace. By November 2026, that peace had a shape. A small house in the Denver suburbs, white shutters, a maple tree in the front yard, and a kitchen large enough to hold laughter. I had bought it that spring. When I signed the papers, the realtor congratulated me, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded, like I'd finally built something no one could take from me. That November, I decided to host Thanksgiving. My first. My house still smelled faintly of fresh paint and cinnamon candles. The dining table I'd picked out months earlier, oak sturdy, the kind meant to last generations, finally had a purpose. I sat at the head of it one night, just staring at the empty plates, imagining the people who might sit there. It wasn't nostalgia that pushed me to invite my family. It was closure. I wanted to rewrite what Thanksgiving meant. I printed the invitations on cream cardstock, elegant but simple. For my parents and Danny, I wrote by hand, "You are invited to Thanksgiving at April's home." dress code. Humble hearts only. It wasn't a jab, it was a prayer. For my guests, I included David, my attorney, Clara, and Mr. Cooper, who had become something of a grandfather figure to me since the trial. That made 7. The 8th chair I decided would stay empty. I placed a handwritten sign on it for those we've lost and found. Thanksgiving morning arrived crisp and gold. The air smelled like wood smoke and apples. I woke before sunrise, slipping into a soft grey sweater, tying my hair back and starting the turkey. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. I roasted vegetables, baked rolls, and even made pumpkin pie from scratch, though I burnt the first crust and laughed instead of swearing. Around noon, David arrived early as promised, carrying a bouquet of fall flowers and a bottle of wine. "You're officially the calmest host I've ever met," he said, stepping into the kitchen. "I cheated," I replied. "I did all the crying last night." He smiled. "Then it's going to be a good day." By 1:30 the table was ready. Linen runner, crystal glasses, silverware polished. I set 3 seats on one side for my guests, 3 opposite for my family if they came, and 1 for myself at the head. The last chair, the empty one, sat at the far end, a quiet sentinel with its sign. The sunlight caught the gold ink just right. "For those we've lost and found." I looked at it for a long time before turning away. At 1:45, I heard the crunch of tyres on gravel. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. My parents stood there holding a homemade pie. My mother's hair had more grey now, my father's face thinner, but their expressions were soft, uncertain, but genuine. "Hi, honey," Mum said quietly. "Hi," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." Dad held out the pie. "Pumpkin, we used your recipe." I took it carefully. "That's brave of you." He chuckled awkwardly. "We burned the first one." "Then you're in good company," I said, setting it on the counter. We didn't hug right away. We just stood there, 3 people who had survived the worst versions of each other. Then Mum reached out, brushed my sleeve and whispered, "It's good to see you, April." "You too," I said and meant it. By 2:00, conversation began to find its rhythm. David poured wine. Clara complimented the food. Mr. Cooper told stories from his youth, his voice weaving warmth through the air. My parents sat quietly at first, listening more than speaking. Then, at 2:30, there was a knock. Danny stood at the door, slightly breathless, wearing a clean shirt and holding a small bouquet of daisies. He looked different, older, steadier somehow. In his other hand was an envelope. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "I had a morning shift. First time I've ever had a legitimate reason to be late. I hope you're proud." I didn't rush to hug him. I simply stepped aside. "Come in." He handed me the envelope. Inside was a $200 check and a note written in messy pen for this month's payment. I'm ahead this time, not because I have to, but because I want to. Something in my chest ached, not from pain, but from release. "Thank you," I said softly. Dinner began quietly, but not uncomfortably so. There were small pauses, awkward moments, and bursts of laughter that felt unsteady but real. Mom served me first without hesitation. Dad leaned over at one point and asked, "Can I fix your faucet before we go? It's dripping." Danny cleared plates without being asked and later washed the dishes, beside Clara humming quietly to himself. As the afternoon light turned amber, Cooper glanced toward the far end of the table. "Who's the empty chair for April?" he asked gently. Everyone turned. The room went still. I looked at the chair, then back at him. "That's for the girl I used to be," I said. "The one who thought love was earned by giving everything. She's not here anymore, but I wanted to save her a seat just in case she ever wants to visit." Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. It was sacred. Mum's eyes glistened. Dad looked down at his plate, his jaw tightening the way it does when he's holding back emotion. Danny just nodded slowly. Under the table, I felt David's hand find mine. He didn't squeeze, just rested there steady and quiet. Mum noticed, met my eyes, and gave the faintest nod, a silent acknowledgement, maybe even approval. For once, I didn't flinch under her gaze. As dessert was served, the laughter grew easier. Mr. Cooper teased Dad about overcooked turkey. Clara told a story about a disastrous first date. Danny cracked a joke that actually made Mum laugh out loud. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the family we used to pretend to be. But it was honest. Later, after everyone had gone home, I stood at the doorway with David as he helped me gather plates. "You did it," he said quietly. "You turned a battlefield into a table." I smiled. With a lot of therapy and a little pie, he laughed softly, then looked at me with something like pride. "You know that empty chair, it's not really empty. You filled it with peace." I didn't reply. I just leaned against the counter, looking at the candle still flickering on the table. For years, I had tried to earn belonging. Today, I simply created it. After he left, I poured a small glass of wine and sat alone at the table. The sign on the chair glowed in the candlelight. "For those we've lost and found." I thought about that girl, the one who wired money every week, who mistook exhaustion for love, who kept waiting for an invitation that never came. She was gone, but I wasn't angry at her anymore. She had done her best with what she knew. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, quiet, forgiving. I got up, turned off the lights, and whispered to the empty chair, "Thank you. You can rest now." As I walked upstairs, I felt something deep in my chest settle. Closure wasn't loud. It was this small, ordinary peace after years of noise. They say you can't choose your family, but you can choose how much of yourself you give them. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is save a piece for yourself. 1 year later, April has received 10,000 of the 50,000 owed. Danny has been working full-time for 14 months, sober for 8 months. Mum continues attending support group meetings. Dad built April a bookshelf as a gift. Some endings aren't happy, they're just honest. If you've stayed with this story until now, maybe it wasn't just curiosity that kept you here. Maybe you saw yourself somewhere inside April's quiet heartbreak, the child who gave too much, the adult who kept paying for love that never truly arrived, the person who kept waiting for recognition that never came. Stories like this one aren't only about family. They're about what happens when you finally decide to stop proving your worth and start protecting your peace. April's journey began in silence and ended in strength. She didn't win because she made her family pay. She won because she finally stopped paying with herself. That's what this story is really about, the moment you realize you don't have to keep bleeding to keep people happy. The moment you understand that being kind doesn't mean being used. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this story was for you. I want to ask you something now. If you were in April's place, what would you have done? Would you have forgiven them? Would you have walked away? Or would you have chosen something in between, the quiet dignity of rebuilding yourself without resentment? I want you to think about that, because these stories aren't meant to give you answers. They're meant to hold up a mirror and help you find your own. And I want you to share that reflection. Leave a comment below and tell me what moment hit you hardest. Was it when April realized her love had become a transaction? When her mother's silence hurt louder than words? Or when she finally sat at a table she built herself? Your story matters too, and when you share it, someone else who's still living in that silence might finally find their voice. Every comment, every thought you leave here helps turn this channel into something bigger than just storytelling. It becomes a circle of understanding where no one has to feel ashamed for wanting to be loved or for choosing to walk away. We all come here carrying something, a broken relationship, a heavy memory, a question that still hurts to ask. But through these stories, we learn that pain doesn't have to define us. It can refine us. It can teach us where to stop giving, where to start living, and where to build boundaries that honor our hearts instead of breaking them. That's why I make these stories. They aren't about revenge, even when they start that way. They're about rediscovery, about people like April who lose everything they thought defined them, only to find what truly matters in the quiet after the storm. Each one reminds us that you can forgive without forgetting, that you can move on without letting go of who you are. And sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't to win, it's to grow. So, if you believe in stories that do more than entertain, if you believe in stories that heal, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel. Here we tell the kinds of stories that make you stop scrolling and start feeling the ones that remind you that no matter how messy the past was, you still have the right to peace. Every week, we share new journeys of betrayal, truth, and transformation. Some will break your heart, some will mend it, but every single one will remind you that your value isn't up for debate. You are not the sum of the people who hurt you. You are the sum of the courage it took to survive them. If this story meant something to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. There's someone out there who needs to hear April's story tonight. Someone who's tired of being the good one, the responsible one, the one who holds everything together while falling apart inside. They might need a reminder that it's okay to stop rescuing people who never learned how to swim. That it's okay to say, I'm done, and still be kind. That forgiveness doesn't mean return, it means release. Before you go, take a moment and ask yourself, who is the empty chair in your life? Is it the parent who never said sorry, the sibling who never showed up, or maybe the younger version of you who still thinks love must be earned? Write about it in the comments. Not for likes, not for sympathy, but because saying it out loud is how you start letting it go. Someone reading your words might finally feel less alone. We are building something rare here, a space where truth doesn't need to be perfect to be powerful, where pain isn't entertainment, it's education, where you don't have to pretend you're fine to belong. And if that resonates with you, then this is your place. Subscribe, stay, be part of this growing family of listeners who believe in second chances, real endings, and honest beginnings. Because in the end, April's story isn't just hers. It's a reminder to all of us that we can outgrow the versions of ourselves that people refuse to see. That we can rebuild from respect, not resentment. And that sometimes the only closure we'll ever get is the one we give ourselves. So as this story fades out, I'll leave you with this. You can't choose how others love you, but you can choose how much of yourself you give them. You can choose to stop bleeding for those who never learned how to hold your heart gently. And you can choose to save a piece of yourself for you, because that piece, once reclaimed, will be enough to start again. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for believing that stories can change us. If this one touched you, let it be more than a video. Let it be a reminder that healing is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of your next one. So click, subscribe, leave your thoughts below, and stay for the next story. Because somewhere out there, another April is waiting to realize she's already enough, and maybe because of you, she finally will.